Chapter 46, The Family Finally Reunited 2. The House Targaryen is stronger together. Queen Rhaella I Targaryen, grandmother of the Messiah. The closer she got to the dragon, the faster Daenerys' heart beat. She could smell the sulfur and smoke, which might be an unpleasant smell to many, but she found it very pleasant. She watched as her nephew stroked the creature's long neck, and the dragon simply melted to his caresses, as if it were a cat as big as a hill and spitting fire. When she got close enough, Daenerys saw the dragon's eyes fall on her, red eyes that resembled hot coals from a bonfire. She was completely paralyzed as the dragon brought its head close to her and began to sniff her, as if discovering something interesting. Unlike the fear one would feel in such a situation, Daenerys just laughed. She wanted to hug the dragon's snout but hesitated, not wanting to disturb it. But suddenly her hand was caught by another and brought to the dragon's scales. Feeling the touch transmitted through her hand, Daenerys opened her mouth and looked directly into the dragon's eyes, which were staring back at her. "Don't be afraid, Caraxes likes you." Daenerys heard her nephew's deep, melodious voice behind her and realized it was he who had forced her to touch the dragon's scales. "It's beautiful, nephew," she commented with an emotional tone. Never in her life had she thought that a nephew could do what she was doing, caress a giant dragon. "I think he liked being called powerful instead of handsome." Enar commented in an amused tone, really liking Daenerys and Rhaella's reaction to seeing Caraxes so close. The astonishment on their faces, even if it wasn't the first time they saw him, was really interesting. "Yes, you're a very strong and very handsome boy." Daenerys laughed at Enar's joke and spoke, stroking the scales warmly to the touch and adding something else to the last part of her speech. Turning to Enar, Daenerys used the deadliest weapon she possessed, a cute, pleading look. She grasped Enar's hand and asked in a tone full of pleading and adoration, "Nephew, can you take me flying on Caraxes?" Rhaella rolled her eyes at her daughter's performance. She knew that her daughter could be manipulative whenever she wanted, like right now. Unfortunately, she wasn't immune to that look, which was simply impossible to defend against. "All right, but some other time." Enar didn't refuse. How could he do that in front of that look? Daenerys couldn't hold back her smile any longer and let out a graceful laugh. After saying goodbye to Caraxes, the three family members, along with Missandei, remained silent throughout the walk. Although she was spying on Enar, just as Daenerys was doing at that moment. Arriving at the place where they would have breakfast, Enar was not surprised to see Kinvara and Banero present. "Son of the Light." Kinvara bowed and greeted Enar with all possible respect and devotion, as did Banero. "You and Banero have done an excellent job. The Red Faith has grown a lot in these almost 6 years. Enar wasn't stingy with his praise. Both of them had really done more than he had expected. The Red Faith had grown so much that he was satisfied with the results of these almost 6 years. "It is an honor to help the Messiah with his concerns." Banero replied with an even more pious tone than Kinvara, if that was possible. The man looked at Enar as if he considered him his god. "Let's talk business while we eat," Enar said as he sat down in the main chair. They all nodded and sat down at the table. Just as Enar was about to speak, another figure walked through the door. It was Visenya, and unlike the day before, she wasn't covered in blood, so Enar could see what his aunt looked like. Frankly, he couldn't believe that the sweet, gentle-looking girl before him was the same person he had seen covered in the blood of men and horses. Visenya simply embodied the phrase, "Don't judge a book by its cover." She and her actions were complete opposites, but he had to admit that he found her incredibly attractive covered in blood. Perhaps his preference for women was influenced by Queen Visenya and Queen Rhaenys, who made him prefer strong women to beautiful vessels. Visenya was a young woman of 18, with long, straight platinum hair that fell down her back in a cascade of shiny strands. Beautiful violet eyes that had a warm look in them, her features were naturally elegant, sweet and gentle. There was a slightly shy smile on her plump red lips. "Mother, sister, Reverend Mother, Archbishop and nephew." Visenya greeted everyone with a smile on her lips. "Sorry I'm late, I overslept." "Don't apologize, Aunt. I still have to thank you for your actions in the war." Enar spoke with a sincere tone of admiration for Visenya's actions. He could count on his hands how many women had the courage, bravery and determination to do what she had done. The smile on Visenya's lips grew as she listened to his words. The worry she'd had before vanished completely at that moment. Her fear was that Enar wouldn't like a woman on the battlefield, but seeing the look of genuine admiration in his eyes, she felt her heart beat faster. She didn't disagree with her mother's decisions. Marrying Enar seemed right and could strengthen House Targaryen, making it more united than ever. So she hoped for a happy relationship, and seeing that Enar wasn't against her being on the battlefield eased 80% of her worries. Not knowing what Visenya was thinking, Enar looked at Kinvara and asked as she took the cup of juice and raised it to her lips. "Is the armor I ordered ready?" Kinvara replied without hesitation. "Fortunately, I have successfully fulfilled your request, Your Grace." A satisfied look appeared on Enar's face. "Armor?" Daenerys asked curiously, and it wasn't just her who was curious. Riella and Visenya also looked at Enar with curious eyes. Enar's lips curved into an amused smile. "The armor was made for Caraxes." His words startled the three women and everyone else present, and the image of a dragon wearing plate armor appeared in their minds. "Isn't it too heavy?" Visenya asked, puzzled. In her eyes, armor the size of Caraxes could provide the steel for an entire army, not to mention the weight. Could the dragon fly with such heavy armor? "It's not full armor, but armor that will cover Caraxes' neck and a helmet to protect his eyes." Enar answered the questions of everyone at the table. "Although the chance of something similar to what happened to Mare Axes is minuscule, I decided to put on armor to protect the fragile parts of the dragon." Note: an armor similar to Saphira's armor in Aragon. Yes, Enar was worried that something similar might happen to Caraxes. Dorne's lucky shot that hit Merax's eye was almost impossible to repeat, but he didn't want to risk his brother's life on something like luck. "Our enemies will probably surrender immediately when they see a dragon in armor," Visenya commented in an amused tone. The very existence of the dragon was disturbing to everyone. Imagine the expressions of the lords of Westeros when they saw the armor covering the dragon. Many of them wouldn't have the courage to tell him that. "Unfortunately, I still haven't managed to hatch the 3 dragon eggs," Daenerys commented with a slightly discouraged expression. Although the dream the night before had given her a hint, it was hard to believe if it was really a hint or just a strange dream. "It doesn't matter, I know you'll make it, Aunt." Enar spoke with a smile. Seeing the unconditional trust he had in her made Daenerys herself feel happy and sweet. Her pale cheeks flushed and she let out a happy laugh. Seeing that look, Riella sighed, knowing that her grandson had captured Daenerys' heart. But she wasn't surprised. Her daughter already had a good impression of Enar. Along with her looks, her kindness, and Enar's confidence in her, it was easy for a girl her daughter's age to fall in love. Riella didn't object, on the contrary, she even encouraged her 2 daughters. A family united in adversity was a strong and cohesive family. Chapter 47, The Family Finally Reunited, 3. Family, in a time of need, is there anything more important? Enar Targaryen, God Emperor of Planetos. The days in Essos were hot and the nights were even colder. At night, in Riella's room, all 4 members of House Targaryen gathered around the fireplace, which burned with orange flames. Enar leaned against the side of the fireplace, holding a goblet of wine. Wine that was very weak, like almost all drinks in this world. One of the reasons people had to drink a lot to get really drunk. Enar was in his grandmother's room with his aunts for a very simple reason. He wanted to explain that the war wasn't just about the throne, but about the fate of humanity's survival. And he couldn't do it alone, he needed people he could trust on his side. First of all, what I'm about to say may shock you, but I hope you'll listen quietly and wait to ask questions when I'm done. Enar spoke, his expression serious and dignified. All 3 women listened intently to his words. To begin, I must tell you why Aegon and his wives conquered Westeros in the first place. Before the conquest, Aegon had a dragon dream, the same kind of dream that Daenerys the Dreamer had and saved House Targaryen from extinction, unlike the 39 houses of dragon lords that disappeared along with Valyria. Enar spoke and continued. A prophetic dream spoke of a winter that would devastate the world of men and that to survive such a calamity a Targaryen must rule the 7 kingdoms. According to Aegon I, the promised prince would come from his line to fight the coming darkness. Winter was coming and with it death, Enar said, looking at the shocked faces of the 3 women. He wasn't talking about just any winter, but the second long night, years without sun and monsters rising from the darkness of the world. And in the north of Westeros, a being who was able to revive the dead and make them fight alongside him was coming with an army of hundreds of thousands of undead, who don't need to eat or rest and are immortal. Enar gripped the wine glass tighter and brought it to his lips, drinking the entire contents in one gulp. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and finished speaking. Not only do we have to survive years without sun and years without crops, but also the monsters born of the world's darkness and an army of nearly immortal undead, all in less than a decade. Riella didn't know what to say in the face of such a shocking revelation. She wanted to open her mouth and say that her grandson was exaggerating, but when she looked into his eyes, his deep purple eyes, she seemed to see a look that made her shiver with fear. The queen hugged herself to warm herself, but the cold feeling didn't seem to go away. The undead army is confirmed. Beyond the wall, all the savages are migrating on a large scale heading south to escape the White Walkers and their leader, the Night King. Enar spoke again. These things only die for 3 things in the world: dragon fire, Valyrian steel, and dragon glass, obsidian. Visenya's face couldn't have been more serious listening to the White Walker's weaknesses. They were few and worse, extremely rare, especially the first 2 items, dragon fire and Valyrian steel. As for dragon glass, she had never seen any in her life. Daenerys could be considered the most relaxed person at this moment. She didn't doubt her nephew's words for a minute. In her eyes, ever since she had learned of this nephew's existence, she had only thought that she was facing a legendary character just like the one described in the Age of Heroes books. As for the prophecy of Aegon I the Conqueror, she only felt that she would do as her ancestors wanted, fight for the survival of humanity together with her nephew. Seeing his serious and dignified face faintly illuminated by the flickering light of the flames, Daenerys approached him and took his hand. "Sweet nephew, don't worry, we're family and we'll fight by your side, and even if only a little, we'll carry some of the burden on your shoulders. Aegon had his wives/sisters and you have us, your brave aunts and an old woman not very good with a sword." Daenerys spoke, looking straight into Enar's eyes. Enar looked stunned at the girl, who was gazing at him with an intensity that could make anyone evaporate from the earth. However, the serious and dignified atmosphere was broken by Rhaella Targaryen's voice. "Daenerys Targaryen, who are you calling an old woman?" The words came out of Riella's lips as an angry snarl, causing Daenerys to laugh and start fleeing across the room while being chased by her mother. Looking at Enar's stunned expression, Visenya sat down next to him and rested her head on his shoulder. "Don't worry, they've both always been like this. Daenerys can annoy our mother like no other person can." She spoke with a soft, gentle tone, hard to associate with the same young woman capable of killing men without any hesitation. Looking at Visenya using her body as a support and her shoulder as a pillow, Enar felt his lips lift in a smile. He took a lock of the young woman's silver hair and kissed it under her somewhat shy eyes. "Thank you, you have no idea how much your trust in me and believing everything I've said so far means to me." He spoke with a gentle tone. Enar didn't know how many years he hadn't been as relaxed as he was at this moment. Having someone to share his burden even a little was simply relaxing. He knew how crazy it was that people believed his words, but seeing his family believe him made him realize that someone without a family was someone without a place to stand in an ocean of worries. Suddenly, Daenerys appeared at Enar's side and grabbed his arm as she spoke. "That's not fair, don't leave me out of the hug." Her face showed a little sweat from running. Daenerys took a lock of her hair and gave it to Enar, much to his confusion. "You kissed Visenya's hair, you must kiss mine." She spoke with an unquestioning tone, as if she wouldn't allow him not to kiss her hair as well as Visenya's. Enar smiled and kissed her hair just as he had Visenya's, earning a satisfied look from the girl who cuddled up to him, practically pushing half of her body on top of his, using him as a pillow without any shame. Watching the scene, Riella's lips curved into a gentle, tender smile, feeling that she could trust Enar with her daughters without worry. She could see that he was a good man and worthy of being her daughter's husband. Uncle Aemon was right, a Targaryen alone in the world is a terrible thing. Enar muttered to himself, surrounded by the 2 women, but his whisper was heard by all 3. "Uncle Aemon?" Daenerys asked curiously, looking at her nephew with a bright gaze, for the name was a typical Valyrian one. "Maester Aemon Targaryen, son of Mikar I Targaryen. He still lives and serves as Maester of Castle Black on the Wall, though he is nearly 100 years old." Enar responded by stroking Daenerys' hair, who practically melted under his caresses and leaned against his body without a care in the world. "Uncle Aemon is alive?" Rhaella said in shock. Enar wasn't surprised by Riella's incredulous words. In a world like this where it was normal to die young or not live much past 40, it was truly shocking that someone lived to almost 100. Daenerys and Visenya were shocked to learn that they had another living relative, and one so old. When he heard what had happened to his family, he wanted to break his decades-old oath and get on a horse and wield a sword, and even though he was blind and old, he wanted to avenge everyone's death. Enar spoke with a sigh, feeling moved by a man who would give his life for his family. Daenerys' eyes filled with tears as she listened to Enar's words, and she truly felt that her family was united and strong. "I want to meet him," she muttered to herself. "You will see him." Enar smiled and replied by stroking her hair, trying to calm the girl down. The next word surprised the three women even more. Besides, he wasn't our only relative living near the wall. Brynden Rivers, one of the great bastards of Westeros and son of Aegon for the Unworthy, is also alive at nearly 120 years of age. The three women's mouths dropped open in shock at hearing the man's age. "Many relatives are still alive. I like a big family," Daenerys muttered to herself with a smile on her lips. Chapter 48, Demetrian Titus and Sigismund I. "They shall be my finest warriors, these men who give themselves to me. Like clay I shall mold them and in the furnace of war forge them. They will be of iron will and steely muscle. In great armor shall I clad them and with the mightiest weapons will they be armed. They will be untouched by plague or disease, no sickness will blight them. They will have tactics, strategies and magic such that no foe can best them in battle. They are my bulwark against the terror. They are the defenders of humanity. They are my angels and they shall know no fear." God Emperor of Planetos. The day after the family talk in the city of Volantis, Enar wore a cloak to hide his appearance as he watched the city with curiosity. It was the first free city he had actually visited. In the city of Bravos he didn't get to know the city, he just stayed on the boat with Belgear. So he was curious about Volantis. Behind Enar, not far from him, 5 red guards pretended to be patrolling the streets, but they were secretly protecting their master from other people. The reason Enar was in the city was simple: he saw an interesting scene in the future, a scene he wanted to see for himself. And if it really happened like the future he had predicted, he would have his first 2 generals from 2 future legions he would create. Along with these 2 legions there would be 18 more legions, but he would create them later in life. Walking through the city, Enar couldn't help but notice that some of the customs of the Red Faith had been incorporated into the people and buildings around him, which didn't surprise him. Most people were slaves and wanted to be free. The Red Faith gave them that. In times of need, most people turned to God for help. Enar walked on. He visited the whole city, except behind the black walls. He didn't want to burn those people alive if they angered him. If there was a more selfish people in the world, it was the descendants of Valyria behind the black walls of Volantis. Suddenly, Enar's footsteps stopped, and he raised his head to look down the alley. A smile appeared on his lips and the Targaryen prince moved toward the alley. Strange sounds of fighting and growling could be heard coming from the alley. A battle was in progress. Entering the alley, what Enar saw made him realize once again the cruelty of this world. 2 teenagers, thin as sticks, could be seen at the end of the alley, cornered by equally hungry dogs. They were so thin, small and dirty that he could count how many ribs each had. One of the teenagers had a piece of bone containing some meat in his hand, apparently the reason for the fight with the dogs to begin with. But it was the look in the eyes of these 2 teenagers that made Enar truly feel that this journey was worth his time. A look that, even in death, showed no fear, only regret for not continuing the fight for survival. The look in the eyes of the 2 teenagers made Enar's heart grow with admiration for them. He saw many different futures, brave men dying, heroic men dying, men full of honor dying. But if there was one thing they had in common, it was the look in their eyes as they faced imminent death. Even though they were men who would be remembered for their deeds, fear filled their gaze. However, the pair of teenagers in front of him, even in death, showed such a calm and cold look that it made him wonder if there was any emotion in these 2 teenagers. Pulling out 2 daggers, Enar threw both blades at the boys and waited idly for the scene to unfold. He didn't say anything or ask them for anything, he just waited in silence. The 2 teenagers were surprised to see the 2 daggers falling in front of them, but there was no hesitation in their actions. The desire for extreme survival made them act as fast and deadly as they could at that moment. However, the dogs weren't slow in their actions either. They lunged at the teenagers with a crazed and raged look on their faces. An exchange of bites and stabs began in front of Enar, a brutal and cruel fight for survival. He watched it all in complete silence and with a coldness that could send shivers down a person's spine. Blood flew in the air as bites and scratches were exchanged for a meager piece of flesh no bigger than a palm. One of the teenagers, despite the bloody bite marks on his arms, with a crazed look on his face, managed to drive the blade into the dog's neck, which, with a sad whimpering sound, stopped moving on top of the boy. The dog's hot, ferrous blood fell onto the boy's body as the dagger was removed from the dog's body. He threw the Canid's body aside and quickly looked over to where his brother was desperately fighting two other dogs. Arg har! Without hesitation, the boy advanced on the dogs with a loud, intimidating shout. The boy, who looked older, was fighting two dogs. He had bite marks on his arms and chest. There was one in particular on his neck that showed he had almost died a few moments ago. However, the boy looked like a wolf, fending off the dog's bites using his own arm as a shield. He seemed to feel no pain as he attacked at the right moment. As a result, he managed to finish off one of the dogs, although he paid a high price, with a lot of his blood dripping from the horrible wounds on his body. Luckily for the boy, his younger brother had arrived and, with a blow from behind, drove the blade into the dog's skull, which died almost instantly. But the younger brother wasn't happy, especially seeing the number of wounds on his older brother's body. "Let's go to the Red Temple to see one of the Red Priestesses." The younger brother spoke quickly while breathing heavily. He tried to lift his brother's body, but it was no use. He didn't even have the strength to walk at the moment, let alone carry someone else. "Titus." He looked at his younger brother, who was trying to lift him up to walk, and spoke in a dry, hoarse tone. "I won't survive." Ignoring his brother's words, Titus screamed loudly and finally gathered the strength to stand up. But after taking 2 steps forward carrying his brother's body, he slipped and fell to the ground, breaking his nose in the process. Young Titus didn't care, and even though he was down, he dragged himself toward the exit of the alley. Even though the chances of not getting help weren't great, the slightest chance caused his body to produce large amounts of adrenaline. "Your brother will die and you with him." Titus didn't know who was speaking, but it was the most beautiful voice he had ever heard. The language the voice was speaking reminded him of his own, but much more sophisticated and elegant. Looking up, Titus, with his indomitable eyes, fixed on the purple eyes of the person in front of him. Enar couldn't help but smile at the sight of those eyes. It was like a calm fury of nature, deadly and silent, with a strength and resilience that even he felt inferior to. "Do you want to survive? Do you want to find a purpose? A purpose for which you feel honored and proud even if you have to die for it?" Enar asked, crouching down as he touched the dirty ground with one knee. "The only thing I ask in return is absolute loyalty." "Will my brother live?" Titus asked, feeling his vision begin to fail from the lack of blood in his body. "Yes. He will be much more than just a man trying to survive, fighting for scraps in the streets day after day." Enar replied with a smile as he took the dagger from Titus' hand. "I accept." There was no hesitation in his words, no trembling or fear, no emotion or anger at the fate that had been thrust upon him and his brother at that moment. Enar showed no hesitation either, slashing his own wrist with the dagger in one swift motion. Blood soon began to ooze from the wound. Enar began to mutter his first spell in the art of blood magic, which he had been taught by Queen Visenya. "You will leave the life you know behind and be reborn from the cocoon of blood and fire. From my blood you will be reborn. Your lives will have no other purpose than to serve me with your body and soul. Even if one day you are unable to walk or die on the battlefield, you will still have fought in my name for all eternity. From my blood you will be reborn. You will be my steel and iron in the fight against the evil of humanity. From my blood you will be reborn. You will command my legions in my name, you will bring death and chaos to my enemies and peace and prosperity to mankind." Titus and Sigmund didn't know what was happening to them at that moment, but they both tasted blood in their mouths and heard every word he said as a deafening sound in their minds. In the end, their bodies were as hot as if they had been thrown into a forge, and they both lost consciousness, only his purple eyes deeply engraved in their souls for all eternity.
Look, if you've actually made it this far into the video and you're still here, come on then, hit subscribe. And honestly, if you think a friend of yours would like this, go on and share it with them. It really helps out. Right, I'm done. I'll get out of your hair now so you can get back to the good stuff. But seriously, Stick around till the end. It's well worth it.
Chapter 49, Flight of the Dragon Eye. The mystery of life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. Aenar I Targaryen, God Emperor of Planetos. Looking at the two teenagers in front of him, Aenar smiled. Titus and Sigmund now looked completely different from the first time he had seen them. Both had grown 10 centimeters and their bodies weren't so skinny, and muscular lines were evident on both young men's bodies. The scars on both of them remained, but in his eyes they were memories that Titus and Sigmund would remember for a lifetime. Ser Willem and Banero will train you both. Their orders are to be treated like mine. Don't hesitate and do them. Don't be lazy or you'll be flogged as punishment. Aenar continued with a calm and regal expression, his eyes looking at the two teenagers. Other children and teenagers will be trained with you. They will be your brothers, and you have to avenge their deaths if they die in the future. Yes, Your Grace. The brothers spoke at the same time while their bodies seemed to exert a pressure on any normal person. Something that made Willem and Banero look shocked. They had personally seen the transformation of the two brothers. They had grown, healed from mortal wounds and become stronger. How could this not shock them? Titus and Sigmund were special. Aenar used his own blood to perform blood magic and basically created the first superhumans. The teenagers didn't know it, but they were faster, stronger, and had reflexes that surpassed most of humanity. Aenar wouldn't be surprised if his blood gave some special abilities to the brothers in front of him. After all, blood was anything but normal. What is the name of the army that Your Grace is creating? Ser Willem, wearing the white armor of the Kingsguard, asked with a respectful tone. When he learned that Aenar was Rhaegar's son, he couldn't help but thank the gods for being benevolent towards House Targaryen, leaving a male descendant for the future. Sardaukar. Aenar spoke the name without hesitation. It was the army loyal only to him, the king, and no one else. They would be his extremely deadly and absolutely loyal elite army. Aenar turned to Banero and asked with a glass of wine in his hand. He looked at the tattoo-covered man with a calm gaze. How are we doing as the regular army? The losses totaled around 5,000 men, many of whom were resurrected, but need to be trained again, due to the loss of memories and emotions, the after-effects of the resurrection. Banero replied with a respectful tone as he bowed. Aenar thought for a moment and spoke. The families of these dead soldiers should receive twice as much help and money. Their children can enter the Red Temple to learn to write and read, and if they wish, join the Red Legion. Although it doesn't sound like much of a reward, it was a great one for fallen soldiers or those with after effects. Learning to read and write might seem ordinary, but in a world where more than 90% of the population was illiterate, it was a reward that could change the fate of many families. I will do as ordered, Your Grace. Banero responded to Aenar's words with a gentle smile on his face. The Son of Light was what he had expected, not only a great man, but also a man who cared about his soldiers and their descendants. Aenar said a few more things to everyone and left Banero's office, walking towards his room. Behind him, for guards from the Red Legion always followed him. They all carried swords at their waists and followed him with cold, serious expressions. All four were soldiers who had died and returned from the dead. They had lost most of their emotions and memories, but they remembered their loyalty and religious devotion, which had become even more solid after dying and reviving. Arriving at his room, Aenar was surprised for a moment to see his aunt on his bed reading a book with a concentrated look. However, it was her clothes that caught his attention, for instead of a dress, she was wearing clothes considered more masculine, worn by lords for riding. Her intention was obvious with those clothes. Hearing the door being opened, Daenerys raised her head and saw her nephew entering the room. She quickly put down her book and got out of bed, running towards him with an excited look on her face. Letting out a sigh, Aenar knew she couldn't hide and flashed a gentle smile. I guess you're ready to fly with me in Caraxes? Absolutely yes. In front of him, Daenerys replied with a look of eagerness to finally fly on a dragon. Nodding his head, Aenar smiled and walked towards the closet to change his clothes. When he opened the closet, he saw that all the clothes had only two colors, red or black, all with the House Targaryen crest on them. Aenar chose his favorite color, red. Going behind a screen under Daenerys' disappointed eyes, Aenar reappeared a few minutes later with his clothes already changed and holding a pair of leather gloves. Laughing at Daenerys' disappointed expression, Aenar spoke in a gentle tone. Come on, you look eager to fly on a dragon. The disappointment of not seeing her nephew change clothes vanished the moment Daenerys heard about flying on a dragon. She quickly came to his side and took his hand, dragging him forward, trying to speed up his steps. "Come on, nephew." Enar rolled his eyes, but understood the reason for her excitement. Like any Targaryen, the desire to fly on a dragon seemed to be ingrained in her blood. It was normal for Daenerys to show such emotion, something that although Riella and Visenya hid well, they also wanted to fly on a dragon. "You don't have to pull me," he said. Enar sighed and took the girl in his arms, which wasn't difficult. He estimated that Daenerys weighed no more than 50 kilos and perhaps even lighter. "You're small," Enar commented in an amused tone, making Daenerys pout, but she didn't deny his words. She really was small and perhaps wouldn't grow more than 3 to 5 centimeters in the future. "Don't you like small girls?" Daenerys asked in a seemingly casual tone, but Enar felt her body tense in his arms. He didn't need to be a genius to know her thoughts. "I don't care how small or tall you are, we'll walk the tortuous path ahead together," Enar replied in a gentle tone and felt her body relax again. Daenerys looked at him with a bright gaze and knew that with those words he wasn't against their marriage, and that made her let out a sweet, pleasant laugh. Then, under Enar's surprised eyes, she approached him and kissed him on the lips in a quick, chaste kiss, quickly pulling his face away with an obvious shyness in her gaze. The dragon princess's cheeks took on a very obvious red hue given her pale skin. Enar rolled his eyes and quickly arrived in front of Caraxes. The crimson dragon was lying on the ground with his huge body looking like a small red hill. As far as he knew, Caraxes had eaten dozens of sheep before going to sleep again the night before. Noticing the arrival of his knight, Caraxes opened his eyes and his double eyelids blinked and his red eyes sharpened. Placing Daenerys on the ground, Enar put on his gloves and gestured for her to follow him. Daenerys saw his movements and imitated them, gradually climbing the iron net. As she climbed, she occasionally glanced at the dragon's face, seeing if it might be angry at her actions and devour her in one bite. To Daenerys' relief, she managed to climb onto the saddle, where Enar could be seen holding a leather belt connected to the saddle by 4 thick chains. Remember, small dragons can be ridden without a saddle, but adult dragons must always be ridden with saddles. Enar explained as he wrapped the belt around his and Daenerys' waists and pulled it tight. Daenerys nodded with a serious expression, listening to Enar's tips and mentally writing everything down so that she would never forget it when she had her own dragon. "Suvgan Caraxes." Daenerys heard Enar speak in High Valyrian. Then, under her shocked eyes, Caraxes rose from the ground, towering to a simply incredible height. In the next instant, Daenerys understood why adult dragons should only be ridden with a saddle. As the dragon rose into the air, she felt her body being thrown backwards violently. If it hadn't been for the belt around her waist and the strong body behind her, she would have been thrown out of the saddle and probably died in the fall. Chapter 50, Flight of the Dragon 2. Faith moves people to do the most unspeakable acts for someone else. Varys the Spider. The gigantic crimson dragon rose into the sky of Volantis, the creature's shadow looming below, covering a large part of the city, causing exclamations of shock and fear among the inhabitants of the First Daughter. Even half an hour after the dragon had disappeared from sight, people were still talking about it. At the same time, the rumors that the Son of Light of the Red Faith was in Volantis spread like fire burning a field of grass. The Crimson Dragon only confirmed the rumors, and this caused countless people to walk towards the Great Red Temple on pilgrimage. Looking down at the summer sea below her, the deep blue waters warmed by the sun, Daenerys opened her mouth without words to describe what she was feeling at that moment. Flying was everything she had hoped for and more. The feeling of freedom was simply intoxicating. The loud, deafening sound of Carax's wings buzzed in her ear as her hair fluttered violently against the wind. "I'll show you something interesting." Daenerys heard her nephew's sweet whisper in her ear, and before she could say anything, he heard him shout, "Dracarys!" Daenerys's eyes widened at the scene that took place the next moment. Caraxes opened his mouth and a funnel of flames gushed into his mouth, and then the dragon simply stepped through the flames themselves with a loud, defiant roar. The dragon princess thought she would feel some pain, but apart from a slight increase in the surrounding temperature and the strong smell of sulfur in the air, she felt nothing, and even enjoyed the feeling of being surrounded by flames, even if it lasted less than 2 seconds. "Did you like it?" Enar asked with a smile, seeing the girl's startled expression. Daenerys' eyes lit up and she forgot her earlier fear and nodded. Again, she spoke with a tone full of emotion and happiness. Enar smiled and continued to order Caraxes to repeat the same act a few times before it stopped. The dragon flew dangerously close to the sea water, its tail hitting the sea, scattering the water everywhere before gaining altitude again. I really want to hatch the dragon egg soon, Daenerys commented, leaning on Enar's chest as she appreciated the feeling of peace and security that surrounded her. Feelings she thought she would never have in her life, especially after experiencing dozens of murders in her short 12-year life. Remember our house motto, Dany? Enar commented, stroking his silky hair. He had no doubt that she was capable of hatching the 3 dragon eggs. Blood and fire. Hearing his unconditional trust in her, Daenerys' lips curved into a happy, beautiful smile. However, his words reminded her of the dream she'd had. A look of determination and faith appeared in her eyes. She was a dragon, and a dragon isn't afraid of fire. Seeing the look in her eyes, Enar knew that his words made any doubt and indecision disappear from her mind. The future unfolded in his eyes, and he saw it, Daenerys naked, coming out of the flames with 3 dragons of different colors. The mother of dragons was about to be born in the near future. Enar was eager to see the birth of Daenerys as the mother of dragons. Let's go back, your mother must be worried. Enar spoke as he grabbed the saddle's handrests and tilted his body to the side, a movement that Caraxes followed and began to fly back to Volantis. Daenerys didn't want to go back at that moment, but knowing that Enar was right, she accepted, even though she wanted to fly for longer. An hour later, Daenerys saw Volantis approaching rapidly, and minutes later, she was already above the city. Looking down, she saw people exclaiming loudly and pointing at the gigantic crimson dragon. This brought a smile to her lips. She understood that Enar liked to see people's reaction to seeing Caraxes. She would do the same if she had a dragon. Daenerys felt a strong tremor as Caraxes landed on the ground, her body thrown forward and stopped by the belt that held her in place. Looking at the height she was at, she knew that if she fell, the chance of injury was quite high. Enar removed the belt from his and Daenerys' waists, freeing himself while Caraxes stayed close to the ground, allowing his rider to descend. Once on the ground, Enar raised his arms, and Daenerys didn't hesitate, jumping off the dragon and being picked up in her arms by her nephew. I see you enjoyed yourselves. Hearing the voice behind them, Enar and Daenerys saw Visenya looking at them with a bored expression. Daenerys flashed a big smile with her teeth showing and spoke animatedly. I was the first to fly the dragon. Visenya rolled her eyes, but her gaze contained a touch of envy. However, she wouldn't fight with Daenerys over something like that. Looking at Enar, Visenya plastered a sweet smile on her lips and spoke in a gentle tone. Lunch is served, nephew. Enar nodded and replied. I'll go and have a bath and join you later. Stroking Daenerys' hair one last time, Enar left, leaving both sisters alone, watching his back in silence. Turning to Visenya, Daenerys flashed a smug smile and commented with a cheerful, mysterious tone. You won't believe what he and I have done. Visenya gritted her teeth listening to her presumption. Daenerys really knew how to irritate her very easily, but in the end curiosity won out in her mind. What did you do? I kissed him. Raising her head like a proud peacock, Daenerys said, making Visenya show a stunned expression. Her sister had grown up on the adult ladder before her. Gritting her teeth, she glared fiercely at Daenerys. In terms of proactivity, her younger sister was actually better than her. Visenya was shy about bed matters and related things. Taking a deep breath, Visenya calmed the bubbling feelings in her chest, and ignoring the smug smile on her sister's lips, she left with slightly faster than normal steps. She didn't think she had any less charm than Daenerys, she was just too shy and gentle to care about being outdone by her younger sister. Daenerys' mood was in the clouds seeing Visenya's expression. Although she couldn't go to war, she could win another kind of war. Jumping up and down with joy, Daenerys followed her sister as she smiled a rather proud smile of her own. In the night, Daenerys was walking through the corridors of the great temple towards her nephew's room, going to say goodnight. However, her steps soon stopped. She quickly hid behind a pillar and spied Kinvara, the Reverend Mother, entering her nephew's room so late at night. A bad, bitter feeling rose in her chest. Daenerys knew it was jealousy talking. She didn't like the scene she was imagining inside Enar's room at the moment. Turning around, Daenerys returned to the room she shared with her sister and mother, which had become routine for them in their years of exile. Entering the room, the dragon princess saw her mother combing her hair in front of a mirror and her older sister lying on the bed holding a book with a candle beside it to illuminate the pages. Why did you come back so quickly, dear? Riella asked curiously, watching her daughter's premature arrival. I saw the Reverend Mother entering Enar's room. Sitting down on the bed, Daenerys replied in a slightly lower tone than usual. Riella and Visenya's movements stopped at her words. Riella smiled and went back to combing her hair as she answered her daughter. She probably went to ask permission for something, dear. You don't have to worry so much. Although she said it herself, she didn't believe her own words one bit. What would a young man feel when he was in a room alone with a beautiful woman in the middle of the night? Daenerys' mood was improved by her mother's words. She looked at her older sister and spoke in a gentle tone. If only sister had been more proactive, my sweet nephew wouldn't be seeking the warmth of another woman right now. Perhaps it was Riella's imagination, but she thought she heard an arrow strike her eldest daughter. Daenerys' intention was not to hurt Visenya with her words, but to encourage her sister to be braver and bolder. If she remained as timid as she was, it was possible that she herself would jump into Enar's bed to prevent other women from climbing into her nephew's bed. Visenya felt great shame seeing Daenerys and Riella's gazes looking at her with encouragement. I'll do it, she murmured shyly, but the two women in the room heard her words and nodded, showing satisfied expressions. In Enar's room, Enar listened attentively to the report from the Emperor's daughters, the Red Faith Intelligence Organization. Word about him was spreading fast. It wouldn't be long before the whole of the known world knew about him and Caraxes. I hope you get better, cousin. I want to fight with a powerful king, not a fat king. Enar muttered to himself. Chapter 51, Reaction from All Parties. I never underestimate a man full of hate. Hatred brings a strength that turns any human into the most terrifying beast in the world. Varys the Spider, observing the furious face of King Robert I Baratheon. Westeros, Land of the Crown, King's Landing. 7th moon of the year 294 BC. Tyrion looked at his adorable nephew and niece with a smile. He still couldn't believe that these sweet children had emerged from the dark and evil hole that was his sister's womb. Their innocent, happy smiles diluted the uncomfortable feeling of contempt in the surrounding gazes. What are my lovely prince and princess doing? Perhaps rehearsing the legendary dragon knight rescuing the princess from the barbarians of the Vale? Tyrion asked, causing Myrcella and Tommen to look at him with surprised expressions. Uncle! Both children ran and stood around him with expressions full of admiration. The girl and boy bore such a strong resemblance to Cersei and Jaime that Tyrion sometimes thought they were both Jaime's son and daughter. But that was impossible, right? The consequences of such thoughts were not simply something trivial, but a real crisis and a possible war capable of devastating the continent once again. Uncle, I'm bigger than you, Myrcella said with a cute, graceful laugh, using her hand to measure the height between her and Tyrion. If this joke had been made by anyone else, Tyrion would have thought it was an insult directed at him, but not coming from his innocent and sweet niece. That's incredible. Myrcella is getting more and more graceful and beautiful with time. He spoke with a quizzical expression, drawing laughter from the two children. However, Myrcella's next question made his smile stiffen for a moment. Uncle, am I pretty enough for Prince Enar riding his dragon Caraxes to come and ask my father for my hand? He was so heroic saving his family from the barbarians of Essos. She spoke with such an innocent and dreamy expression that she stopped the cruel words from leaving Tyrion's lips. Proposing? He would find it kind enough if Prince Enar didn't incinerate them all in seconds. He would certainly do the same if he had a dragon capable of burning tens of thousands of people alive. Who wouldn't want a beautiful, sweet princess, dear Myrcella? Tyrion certainly couldn't say what he was thinking and smiled gently at the girl, who kept a dreamy smile on her lips, as if delighted at the idea of being the wife of someone so important. Tyrion couldn't help but think of the rumors that had been circulating around Westeros for a month. The existence of Enar Targaryen was like a powerful punch to the stomachs of the great houses. And the blow was even more devastating when the existence of the dragon called Caraxes was revealed. Obviously, such rumors at first were considered just nonsense and madness coming from Essos. However, as more ships arrived from the continent carrying the same story, the rumor ceased to be just a rumor. Within a month, it became a fact that everyone had to accept with a bitter taste, especially the great houses that had taken part in the rebellion 12 years ago. Tyrion saw countless houses moving into the shadows with the news and had no doubt that the pretender to the Iron Throne from across the sea had many supporters in Westeros. Honestly, he didn't blame these noble houses. Robert I Baratheon's reign had been mediocre to say the least. Worst of all, the Targaryen prince, in addition to owning a full-grown dragon, commanded an army of almost 40,000 men. Add that to the fleet in Volantis and the internal problems of the Seven Kingdoms, and it was clear that they had a big problem on their hands. Tyrion said goodbye to his niece and nephew as he listened to them talk, innocently excited, about the dragon that could cover a city like Volantis with the shadow of its wings. The little lion of House Lannister was neither as optimistic nor as innocent as his nephews. He knew very well what was coming: blood and fire. Their blood and the fire of House Targaryen. Tyrion walked to the small council chamber. He ignored the king's guard and opened the doors, surprised by the sight before him. His father, Tywin Lannister, Cersei Lannister, Jon Arryn, Renly Baratheon, Stannis Baratheon, Varys, Littlefinger and several others were present. The atmosphere was stifling, to say the least. It was the first time Tyrion had seen his father with such an expression, serious, dignified and full of a majesty that made him stand out more than Robert I Baratheon himself, who filled the seat with his huge fat body. All eyes turned to Tyrion for a moment, but soon focused back on Varys. "Your information, eunuch?" Robert asked. His voice was calm, but it hid a fury that everyone noticed and no one dared to comment on. Aenar Targaryen, first of his name, Knight of Caraxes, King of the Undulls, the Rhoynars and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, Father of Dragons, Son of the Light of Volantis, the King who was promised. The long list of titles came out of the eunuch's fat lips, making everyone serious. Apart from the obvious ones related to the Iron Throne, the rest was what really worried everyone. Varys continued to keep the same smile on his lips and the enigmatic look in his eyes. The size of the crimson dragon called Caraxes is immense, unmistakably an adult and powerful dragon in its prime. According to the spies, when the dragon flies above Volantis, the sky darkens under the shadow of its wings. Its fire is as red as blood and capable of melting rock into lava. The tense atmosphere was abruptly broken by a female voice echoing in the hall. "It's just a dragon. We have the armies of the Seven Kingdoms, 200,000 men." Tyrion was speechless at the level of intelligence demonstrated by his sister's words. Although he knew that intelligence had never been her strong point, this level of stupidity was truly impressive. Even a blind man could see that they were completely dead if Prince Targaryen decided to mount his dragon and reduce the Red Keep to ashes. Slap sound. A loud, sharp slap echoed through the small council chamber. "Shut up, woman. Nobody asked you anything." Robert's voice was terribly cold and slightly frightening. His deep blue eyes seemed to blaze with an uncommon fury. Tyrion admitted to himself, he had enjoyed seeing Cersei slapped. The expression of shock and indignation on his sister's face was simply spectacular. In another, more appropriate moment, he would even have paid for a prostitute and a jug of wine for Robert as thanks. Tywin, under normal circumstances, would have been angered by such an act. But in this case he thought it was a good slap. He still found it hard to believe that something so stupid had come out of his own balls. And his beloved wife's womb. House Lannister had an army of 50,000 men, comparable in numbers to the Dothraki, but even so the nomadic warriors hadn't lasted more than 15 minutes against a dragon. He really wanted to understand how his daughter could consider Myr a monster capable of incinerating an entire army equivalent to House Lannister in a matter of minutes. Seeing that her father did absolutely nothing while she was humiliated in front of the entire court, Cersei suppressed the resentment and hatred inside her, pulling herself together with a beautiful smile on her lips. But her hands clenched in her lap made it clear that she was trying her best not to say anything rash. "In answer to the queen, it's no mere dragon," Varys said in a respectful tone, but his words only made the atmosphere even heavier. "It's a full-grown dragon that burned more than 40,000 men and horses alive in less than 15 minutes. What was the concept of burning 40,000 people in less than 15 minutes? If they followed that logic, an army of 100,000 men would be completely destroyed in half an hour. And that was absolutely terrifying. Robert, however, didn't seem to have heard any of this. He looked at the eunuch and asked, "Who are his parents?" Varys held the king's gaze, restraining himself as much as possible, and then answered, bowing slightly. According to himself, Prince of Dragonstone, Rhaegar of Targaryen and Lady Lyanna of House Stark. Crash! The chair Robert was sitting on flew against the wall, thrown by the king himself, in front of everyone's astonished gazes. No one had ever imagined that he could still be so strong and surprisingly fast. The fruit of a rape. Robert's roar echoed through the small council chamber. I'll kill him like I killed his bloody father. Chapter 52, Reaction from All Parties 2. Never trust in luck. Behind it there is always someone profiting from your misfortune. Peter Baelish, Master of Coin. Tyrion had never heard a roar like that. It wasn't just a cry of rage, but the roar of a wounded animal consumed by hatred. The sound sent shivers through his body. At that moment, Robert the First Baratheon did indeed sound like a king. Calm down, Robert. We need to keep a cool head to deal with what's coming. Jon Arryn approached the king quickly, his presence and words having an immediate effect. Robert's mood began to stabilize and he stopped wheezing with rage. This eased, if only slightly, the suffocating tension that hung over the small council chamber. Tywin, impassive, turned to Pycelle and asked in a regal tone, "What are the chances of us getting a clear shot as Dorne has in the past?" Pycelle, still pretending to be a frail and feeble old man, replied in his usual trembling voice. "The Order has carried out some experiments. They were conducted about 80 years after the event, launching 10,000 scorpions at a target fixed 1,000 meters high and motionless. In the end, none of them hit the target." No one questioned why the Order of the Maesters conducted such suspicious experiments just when House Targaryen was still at its peak. But the numbers made one thing clear: Dorne had been incredibly lucky to land that fatal shot on a dragon. Note, this is one of the reasons why I find Rhaegal's death completely unrealistic and stupid. Precision rifle bullets already lose their effectiveness at great distances, let alone a giant medieval beast. Rhaegal's death was clearly inserted just to justify Dany burning down King's Landing. This means that even if we fill the walls with scorpions, the chances of killing a dragon are still extremely low. Renly Baratheon broke the silence with a comment full of concern. The fear in his eyes was evident and understandable. After all, House Baratheon had been the main driving force behind the fall of the Targaryens. If there was one family that would be reduced to ashes first, it was his. We're lucky the Targaryen prince doesn't have his grandfather's madness. Tyrion swirled the wine in his goblet before taking a sip and continuing. If it were the other way around, the Red Keep would have become the second Harrenhal by now. Although Tywin Lannister despised his youngest son, he couldn't help but agree with that statement. The thought of Aerys with a dragon sent shivers down his spine. "If I may say so," Tyrion continued, setting his goblet down on the table, "we need to strengthen the ties between House Baratheon and the great houses." Many nodded immediately. There was no alternative. This was the most essential step at that moment. No one doubted that, at this very moment, many noble houses were preparing to fight the Baratheons alongside Prince Targaryen. The threat of destruction was enough to bend even the proudest. For many, the return of the dragons was divine punishment for Robert Baratheon killing his own kin. Murderers of kin must always receive punishment from the gods. Marrying Prince Joffrey to Lady Margaery Tyrell could bring House Tyrell to the side of the crown. Peter, known as Littlefinger, said with a smile on his lips, his eyes narrowing into a thoughtful look. "Tyrell?" Tyrion let out a short but humorless laugh. "They'll be the first to ally themselves with Prince Targaryen. Add to that the hatred of House Martell, and we have two great houses as enemies." The dwarf took a sip of wine, eyeing Littlefinger suspiciously. There had always been something about him that made it impossible to trust him completely. "Two great houses," Tyrion continued, "with armies that together amount to hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Add to that Prince Targaryen's 40,000 men and a dragon capable of incinerating entire armies in minutes. Not to mention that the Tyrells are the kingdom's granary, with plenty of food to sustain their troops for as long as they want. We could invite them to King's Landing and take them hostage." Cersei spoke casually, as if she had solved the problem with a snap of her fingers. The silence that followed was almost comical. Everyone in the room exchanged glances before simply ignoring her suggestion. If something like this was so easy, other great houses would have been brought down long ago with this cheap trick. The break in the silence came from Tywin, who until then had watched everything without saying a word. "I will hire assassins from the House of Black and White in Bravos." This time, the silence that spread through the small council chamber was different. Everyone knew what that meant. Hiring an assassin of that order was already absurdly expensive. Hiring one to kill a dragon lord was even more expensive. Hiring one to kill a dragon lord in a city protected by religious and political fanatics was beyond any imaginable price. And only 2 people in that room had enough wealth to afford such a thing: Tywin Lannister and Littlefinger. The latter, thanks to years of fraud and embezzlement in the kingdom's finances, had amassed a fortune that could rival that of a great house. But nobody knew about it, and they were unlikely to in the future. Robert, who until then had listened to everything in silence, looked around the table. The only ones with calm expressions were Tywin, Stannis, and the imp. The rest showed visible concern. The king then leaned back, wiped the alcohol stains from the corner of his mouth, and said in his deep voice, "If he hasn't come to us, it means he wants to reconquer Westeros. That means he doesn't want to rule Ashes, which is good news." Robert then slammed his hand down hard on the table, his blue gaze filled with restrained fury. "He will come to avenge his rapist father, and I will kill him just as I killed his damned father." The strong, powerful man who hadn't been seen since the Greyjoy Rebellion had reappeared more imposing than ever, perhaps even more so than in the war 12 years ago. Even though he was an irresponsible king, Robert knew he had to secure the throne for his son. He had no doubt that that incestuous bastard would kill everyone related to him without any hesitation. Ensuring his children's safety was his priority, even if it meant becoming dragon food. "Littlefinger, I don't care how, get some money and help Lord Tywin pay off the assassins. If that fails, we'll prepare for war." Robert's order echoed with a firm and powerful tone, surprising everyone in the room. "Yes, Your Grace." Littlefinger smiled, trying hard to be serious, but deep down he could already see the opportunities looming before him. Jon Arryn sighed. How he wished this Robert had been awake all the time. But he knew that this moment of lucidity would be fleeting. His eyes turned to the Queen, who remained impassive, her gaze deep and calculating. The investigations of the last few months had revealed frightening truths that would have terrible consequences for the whole of Westeros. Now, with Prince Targaryen on the other side of the sea, the situation was taking an even darker turn. "Eunuch, send a message to Ned explaining everything." Robert turned to Varys, his voice filled with authority. "I'll do as you say, Your Grace." The eunuch's gentle smile didn't convince Tyrion for a second. The dwarf watched in silence as the most powerful men in the 7 kingdoms were wary of a young man who hadn't even turned 13. That said a lot about the world they lived in. Perhaps it was time to run far away. The scales of war were definitely not tipping in favor of the Lannisters or the Baratheons. Both seemed destined to burn under the flames of a dragon. He drank the rest of his wine, and as he lowered the goblet, he felt a piercing gaze upon him. His father. Tywin Lannister's cold gaze sent a shiver down his spine. "Your Grace." His father's voice sounded exactly as Tyrion had feared. Robert raised an eyebrow, confused. "To ensure that our enemy sponsors his own war, we need the Iron Bank not to support Prince Targaryen. Or, at the very least, to remain neutral." Tywin's voice was icy, impassive. Tyrion immediately understood. If the Iron Bank chose sides, it could define the war before it even began. Robert frowned. He didn't like to think about these things, but he knew Tywin was right. "Who do you suggest goes to Braavos?" Tywin didn't hesitate. "Although my son is physically unfit, his intelligence is unquestionable." At any other time, Tyrion would have been thrilled to hear his father acknowledge his intelligence. Now all he felt was a shiver of dread. Braavos. The continent of Essos was undoubtedly the most dangerous place in the world at the moment. Even the free cities, powerful as they were, didn't dare raise their voices when a dragon lord from Valyria landed in their harbors with a dragon. Even less so now that all the free cities' old anti-dragon weapons had been corroded by time. If the information that Tyrion Lannister was in Essos leaked out, his fate would be sealed. "Good move, father. You don't have the guts to kill me, so you want others to do it for you." Tyrion smiled. But inside he felt the pain of a pawn about to be sacrificed on the board of a much bigger game. Chapter 53, Reaction from All Parties 3. Always expect betrayal from the one you least expect. Believe me, it will make the pain less painful. Advice from an old woman, Olenna of House Tyrell. The Reach High Garden. Marjorie stood in a corner, watching her parents, siblings and grandmother arguing with heated and somewhat rude words, mainly from her grandmother Olenna. The girl could feel the tense atmosphere in the air. Mace Tyrell, Lord of High Garden, Lord Paramount of the Mander, Defender of the Marches, High Marshal of the Reach, Warden of the South and head of House Tyrell, looked at his mother and asked with a slightly apprehensive tone, "What are we going to do, mother?" Olenna looked at her cowardly son and was still amazed that such a stupid creature had come out of her womb. Letting out a weary sigh, she stared at him with a touch of coldness that made the Guardian of the South wince. "Stop acting like a child. You're the fucking Guardian of the South, act like it, you big stupid green pig." Mace just ducked his head and cringed like a little boy at his mother's words, something his wife, Allery Hightower, found amusing. She laughed and held her husband's arm, gently comforting him. "A raven has arrived from King's Landing. The king has invited House Tyrell to a tournament to commemorate Prince Joffrey's name day." With his wife's help, Mace spoke in an excited tone. In his eyes, this was House Tyrell's chance to get engaged to the crown prince of the Iron Throne. Looking at the growing ambition in her son's eyes, Olenna let out another weary, helpless sigh. "You stupid son, have you forgotten the news we received a week ago? How can you even consider going to King's Landing right now?" She spoke with a scolding tone, her face showing irritation at her son's thoughts. She couldn't understand why he had such great ambition while being mediocre in every sense of the word. "But they're just rumors," Mace retorted, dissatisfied with his mother's hesitation. His reply was met with Olenna's cane striking his body repeatedly. The old woman was livid with rage at that moment. "Rumors? You say that hundreds of the same rumors are just damn rumors." Olenna shouted and raged. She really wanted to die at that moment so that she wouldn't have to stress about every silly thing her son said. Unfortunately, she had to stay alive, or her stupid son would destroy House Tyrell in less than 10 years. "Sorry, mother. I'm not going to answer you anymore, just stop hitting me," Mace begged as he shielded his face with his fat arms. Stopping beating her son when she heard his pleas, Olenna turned her gaze to her eldest grandson, Willis, and asked in a gentle tone, "What do you think, Willis? Reinforcing the border in the west and preparing for war?" Willis didn't hesitate to answer. His words brought a smile to Olenna's flabby lips. If Mace had at least 10% of his grandson's intelligence and wit, she wouldn't be so worried. "Why?" she continued. "Because with the news of Prince Targaryen and his dragon, along with his army of fanatics, it's only a matter of time before they come to Westeros. Anyone with a modicum of discernment knows that alliances must be formed now to resist the reconquest of the Targaryen dynasty." Willis replied calmly and gently. "Tywin Lannister is a cruel and merciless man. Anyone who doesn't side with him will be exterminated." Finished the High Garden heir. Turning to Mace, Olenna couldn't help but speak sarcastically. "If you had 10% of Willis' intelligence, I could die in peace, knowing that House Tyrell would survive longer." Mace bowed his head like a scolded child, which, strange as it was, eased the tension in the hall a little. "You're right, Willis. The old lion is merciless. He'll slit our necks the moment we turn our backs on him." Olenna spoke calmly before continuing. "Unlike other great houses, we fought for House Targaryen in the rebellion 12 years ago. If Prince Targaryen is at all intelligent, he will know that an alliance with House Tyrell is more profitable and reliable than with other great houses." She concluded firmly. "We just need to wait and prepare to bend the knee at the right moment. We will remain the guardians of the South. High Garden will not become another Harrenhal while I am alive. Can we trust this Prince Targaryen, mother? Wouldn't it be better to marry Marjorie off to Prince Joffrey?" Mace questioned, feeling that, as Lord of High Garden, he had the right to have his say. "You fool." Olenna sighed, exasperated. "House Baratheon looks strong, but it's not. It's in debt, practically bankrupt, owing millions to the Iron Bank and to us. Dorne will attack the Lannisters at the slightest opportunity. The Vale is powerful, but sparsely populated. House Tully is unable to control its vassals and is weakened. The North is strong but difficult to rally quickly. My spies in King's Landing have already told me that Joffrey is madder than Aerys and crueler than Maegor. Tommen is a naive child and too young to rule anything. Stannis is the heir presumptive, but nobody likes him. Renly is even worse. A pillowbiter can't be king. 5 options for the Iron Throne and all are unfit. That means that if a certain mad prince dies, House Baratheon will go to war for the succession. Westeros needs just one spark for the flames of war to consume the continent once again. And that spark is Enar Targaryen and his dragon, who burned 40,000 men alive in less than 15 bloody minutes. Olenna concluded, sitting back in her chair with a serene expression. Olenna's words made Willis's eyes widen. For him, his grandmother's words meant only one thing: Prince Joffrey would die at any moment. Who will kill Prince Baratheon? Willis asked in disbelief. Although, as his mother had said, House Baratheon was not at its peak, it was still the royal house of Westeros. Many respected it and had heeded Robert Baratheon's call. Olenna rolled her eyes, her lips curving into a mischievous smile. I'm not saying that the little lion will die. But his death could be very convenient for many ambitious people. Her smile sent a shiver through everyone in the room, including Marjorie. No one doubted what would happen. The woman in front of them had earned the title of Queen of Thorns not only for her sharp tongue, but also for her ruthless intelligence. What are we going to do, Mother? What if Robert calls up his banners and marches into the Reach? Mace asked cautiously. Even if Reach had vast resources and a large army, Robert was still king. He could summon hundreds of thousands of soldiers. If they attack, burn all the crops and let the pigs devour each other. Olenna said, cold and indifferent to the death of millions with her words. The Reach was the granary of the Seven Kingdoms. They sold food at low prices to all the other territories. If the crops were burned, famine would spread across Westeros at alarming levels. Only those with fertile land could survive. The North, for example, would be one of the worst affected. Even with Reach's help, they were already struggling to feed their population. Without this help, the situation would become untenable. Olenna's strategy was clear: a cruel sacrifice to further weaken her enemies. She was willing to lose an arm if it meant cutting off both of her opponent's arms and legs. Willis looked at his grandmother with admiration. Perhaps because he was young, he didn't yet have the same determination to make such a drastic decision. He could follow this strategy, but he would hesitate. He would never have the same coolness as Olenna. Mace, on the other hand, shook his head repeatedly in denial. He couldn't even conceive of such a proposal. How much gold would House Tyrell lose by burning its crops? The number of golden dragons that would no longer enter their coffers was something he didn't even want to think about. Watching her son shake his head and mutter to himself, Olenna didn't need to be a seer to understand his thoughts. It left her speechless. Was Mace really her son? Perhaps she had drunk too much and slept with her sister's husband. Wait, she really had stolen her sister's husband and married him. Putting these thoughts aside, Olenna smiled mischievously and muttered to herself. I'm really curious to see what happens to King's Landing if we stop supplying the city with food. Will they devour each other like starving pigs behind the walls? Chapter 54 Reaction from All Parties 4. My body, soul and mind will be yours. I will protect you with my life, my king. Leda Dane, kneeling before Enar Targaryen. Dorne, Sunspear. Old Palace. Damn, burning 40,000 men in less than 15 minutes is insane. Obara, Oberyn's eldest bastard daughter and leader of the Sand Snakes, spoke. She was tall and had a strong body. Her voice was thick, slightly effeminate, not at all like that of a woman. Be more polite in your words, sister. Nymeria, the second eldest daughter, replied with an elegant smile on her red lips. Although she looked like a virtuous lady from a noble house, you never knew if she was hiding a dagger in her hands until it was too late. Don't fight, my ears are calloused from all your arguments on this trip. Tyene, the third daughter of the Serpent of Dorne, spoke in a sweet, silky voice. Small and delicate, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, her appearance was deceiving about her skill with poisons. Oberyn's third daughter was as deadly as her sisters. Her delicacy perfectly concealed her mastery of poisons, which she manipulated with lethal skill. Stop arguing, my father is calling us all. Arianne, wearing a flowing red silk dress, spoke with a sensual tone as she walked gracefully towards the dining hall. Obara and Nymeria looked at each other and snorted at the same time. Both followed behind Arianne with quick steps. Letting out a tired sigh, Tyene followed the group with her small, graceful steps. When Arianne entered the hall, the first person she saw was her cousin, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, who was hiding in Dorne under the alias Rhaena Sand. The girl had grown a lot in the last year and a half, taller, more voluptuous in the right places and just as deadly, as far as Arianne could tell from the fight between her and her uncle Oberyn. Another person present was the Prince of Dorne himself, her father, Doran Martell. Although he maintained his usual calm and deep expression, Arianne noticed a slight relaxation between his eyebrows. He was in a great mood, and Arianne understood why. Prince Targaryen was more remarkable than anyone expected. Even she thought the young prince had stepped straight out of one of the stories from the Age of Heroes. After all, traveling to another continent at the age of 12 to protect his family and burn 40,000 men was something worthy of being written down in the annals of history. How could anyone not admire a person capable of such a feat? However, knowing Prince Targaryen's secret identity, Arianne couldn't help but be surprised that such a powerful and honorable young man had grown up in the inhospitable lands of the north as a mere bastard. Honestly, she thanked the gods that Enar had been raised by Eddard Stark. If he had grown up resentful and angry at the world, like most of the bastards in Westeros, she could imagine the catastrophe that would have occurred. "Father, did you request my presence?" Arianne asked with a seductive smile on her lips. "You and Oberyn will meet Prince Enar and attend his coronation in Volantis. Oberyn will act as the prince's general and advisor. As for you, you will act as Queen Riella's handmaid until the prince marries his wife." Doran spoke in a calm tone, remembering the raven he had received from the queen. Riella's intentions were obvious. She wanted to know which side Dorne was on and whether they would fight alongside House Targaryen. At the same time, Oberyn and Arianne would serve as hostages to prevent House Martell from betraying the Targaryens. Doran couldn't help noticing that the exile in Essos had really sharpened the queen's political sense and made her extremely wary of betrayal. Which he understood perfectly. After all, House Targaryen collapsed under the weight of conspiracies and betrayals. Arianne's smile remained the same, but there was a deep bitterness hidden in her gaze. "Handmaid? Have you ever seen the heiress of a kingdom become a handmaid?" In her eyes, Doran was pushing her away from the throne of Dorne to favor Quentyn. "Father, you'll regret taking me away from what is rightfully mine. I'll watch with pleasure as you see me take what belongs to me with violence and force." Arianne thought, clenching her fists. Why was Arianne still pure and virgin, even with all the temptations of sex? The reason was right in front of her. Her father didn't want to let her inherit the throne of Dorne. If Doran didn't want to give her the Sun Throne, then she would take it by force, even if it meant becoming the secret lover of Prince Targaryen from across the sea. Arianne knew how to use her natural advantages, and she would use them to get what she wanted. Knowing exactly how to win a man's favor, she was confident that she could make Prince Enar accept her. Rhaenys didn't know that her cousin had been planning to seduce her brother for years, ever since she realized that Doran had no intention of passing the Sun Throne on to her. At that moment, however, Rhaenys was happy and full of joy. Unlike Oberyn and Arianne, she would go straight north to find Moonfire and then fly to Volantis to find her family. How could she not be happy? Her family would finally be reunited after decades of separation, blood, sweat, and pain. "Father, I heard that the new Sword of the Morning is coming to Sunspear," Arianne asked, causing all eyes to turn to Doran. The Lord of Dorne nodded and spoke in a voice full of admiration. "Leda Dane, daughter of Aishera Dane, defeated 20 men in battle and became worthy to wield Dawn, becoming the new Sword of the Morning. Even his brother, a great warrior, couldn't claim to have fought 20 men and come out of such a battle unscathed. But Leda did it and killed them all without suffering a scratch." Sighs of admiration echoed around them. The Sand Snakes were impressed to hear the Lord of Dorne's words. "What has she come to do in Sunspear?" Arianne asked curiously. It was very rare for a Sword of the Morning to leave Starfall, and when they did, it was usually to challenge great swordsmen and renowned warriors. "She's going with you and Oberyn to Essos. She wants to serve as a Kingsguard, just as her uncle served Prince Rhaegar." Doran replied without hesitation. He remembered the raven sent by Aishera Dane, in which the woman explained her daughter's purpose. "Will all the Swords of the Morning become members of the Royal Guard in the future?" Tyene commented in an amused tone, provoking laughter that was joined by that of her sisters. "But will the prince accept a woman into the Royal Guard? There have never been any in the Great Order of Knights of the Royal Guard." Nymeria asked, looking curiously at Rhaenys, the only person present who knew Prince Targaryen's mindset, despite never having met him in person. "My brother doesn't care what someone has between their legs. If the person is useful, even a blind man can occupy the position of Master of Whispers." Rhaenys shrugged and replied with a touch of amusement. Besides, the Royal Guard was created by Queen Visenya. Arianne, in particular, was pleased to hear those words. The more open-minded Prince Targaryen, her future man, could make his plans to control Dorne much easier. Everyone nodded, but began to form a clearer picture of the mysterious Prince Targaryen. Even though he was young, he didn't seem inexperienced, but rather mature and wise beyond his years. Rhaenys, for her part, was well aware of why her brother was so mature. He carried the weight of leading humanity forward, his prophetic visions and the future wars that would determine whether humanity would continue or perish. As they discussed Prince Targaryen, the doors opened and Oberyn entered the hall with his wife, Illyria Sand. They walked arm in arm, their hair slightly mussed and the sweat still visible on their faces, causing laughter in the dining hall. "We seem to have gotten in the way of something important, father," Arianne commented in a gracious, amused tone. Doran just snorted, not bothering to interrupt his younger brother's pleasure time. He still remembered the words Oberyn had said a few days ago. "I assume the preparations are ready. You will leave immediately for Volantis. We don't want to miss Prince Targaryen's coronation." Oberyn sighed as he saw the implacable look on his brother's face. Doran was especially vindictive when he wanted to be. He had only joked that his brother could no longer sleep with a woman and, because of those words, now he barely had time to rest or even stand still for a moment. "Yes, my brother," Oberyn replied with a faintly sad and despondent tone, causing the laughter to grow even louder. Chapter 55, Reaction from All Parties v. Why did the gods make incestuous creatures so beautiful and me a monster in people's eyes? Tyrion Lannister thought as he observed the beauty of House Targaryen. Seeing the gigantic titan of Braavos getting closer and closer, Tyrion felt completely insignificant, even more so than he usually did on a daily basis. Tyrion looked around, observing the ship he was on. As he represented a king, naturally the ship couldn't look sloppy. He was traveling on a new ship that had never touched the sea. Curiously, the ship's name was the Purity of the Princess. "She's no longer a virgin," Tyrion joked in an amused tone, reflecting on the ship's name. However, as he looked at the guards following him, he couldn't help but let out a sigh. They were only young and immature, they had probably never seen blood in their lives. The little lion of House Lannister could imagine that, in battle, these young men wouldn't last more than a few minutes against experienced warriors. Each of them wore arrogant expressions, trying to appear calm in the face of the majestic and magnificent city they were approaching. However, as they approached the city, Tyrion felt that he was getting close to a huge monster, ready to devour him at any moment. If he wasn't careful, Braavos might become his tomb, something his father certainly expected. After all, if he died serving the realm, he would die an honorable death and finally become worthy in the eyes of all, no longer a stain on the glorious reputation of House Lannister. "May the Seven help me, I still want to go back to King's Landing and visit all the brothels in that shit-stinking city at least once more in my life," Tyrion muttered to himself, preferring to be in the warm, soft arms of the whores of King's Landing than in that city that could become his tomb. Letting out a sigh, Tyrion watched as the ship docked at the port of Chequy, where customs officers were already prepared to inspect the vessel on the orders of the Sea Lord of Braavos. In the eyes of the people, the Titan of Braavos was a marvel, but for Tyrion, the true splendor of that city lay in the Braavos arsenal. There, war galleys could be built in a single day, a true masterpiece of Braavosi engineering. Tyrion straightened his golden clothes and flashed his best smile, although for many it wasn't a pretty one. Hoger, wearing typical Braavos garb, climbed aboard, surrounded by guards carrying fine swords. His eyes quickly scanned the ship before settling on its probable owner. A dwarf. A dwarf dressed in expensive clothes, bearing the crest of a golden lion. Tyrion Lannister, the son of the Golden Lion of the Rock. Hoger came to the conclusion of Tyrion's identity in an instant. As he gestured for the guards to begin their inspection of the ship, Hoger approached Tyrion and asked directly the purpose of his visit. "Why are you traveling to the city of Braavos?" "The Iron Bank," Tyrion answered without any hesitation. Hoger gave Tyrion a deep look and spoke in a casual tone. "If you and your men break the laws of Braavos, you'll be thrown into the dungeons, and your father will have to pay a lot of gold to get you out. It's more likely that he'll leave me to rot in the dungeons and simply forget I exist," Tyrion replied in an amused tone. Although it sounded like a joke, it was very possible that it would happen. His father would probably announce that he had died on the journey to Braavos. Hoger stared at the imp for a moment, without replying. In silence, he waited for the guards to return from their inspection, which took no more than 20 minutes. When one of the guards nodded, indicating that there was nothing wrong with the boat, Hoger turned his gaze to the dwarf and said, "Be careful what you do in Braavos." Having said that, he set off with the guards, leaving Tyrion alone again. "Prepare to leave," Tyrion ordered his own guards in a calm tone. As Tyrion stepped off the boat, he saw a crowd in front of him and couldn't help thinking that it was going to be a long day. As he made his way through the crowd surrounded by his guards, he began to notice something strange. People were bumping into him more than usual. Looking around, his expression changed dramatically. His guards were gone. He was alone. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in the back of his head. His vision darkened and he fell unconscious. Before he completely lost consciousness, he felt the hot, dirty ground against his face as feet trampled over him. In his last remnants of consciousness, a single thought crossed his mind. "I'm dead. Tisha, my wife. I miss you so much." Tyrion awoke to the strong smell of musty wood. Opening his eyes with difficulty, he found himself in a suspicious cellar, impregnated with the strong smell of fish. Looking around, he couldn't help thinking he was in the house of a fisherman or a fishmonger. However, in the next second, he hissed in pain as he felt a throbbing blow to the back of his head. He tried to bring his hand to the spot, but realized that his wrists were bound. Struggling to move, he finally managed to sit up and take a closer look at his surroundings. What he saw made him breathe a sigh of relief. As long as he was alive, it meant that his kidnappers wanted something from him. Whether it was gold or anything else, he didn't care, as long as he could get back to Westeros. Suddenly, he heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. Soon, he saw a face he could never have expected in his entire life. "Is that Barristan?" Tyrion asked, his voice filled with genuine confusion and disbelief. Yes, standing before him was none other than Ser Barristan Selmy the Bold, a celebrated hero of the Kingsguard, from the time when these knights were still considered the strongest in the Seven Kingdoms. "You seem to have woken up, Lord Tyrion," Barristan said, crouching down in front of the dwarf and helping him to drink water from a wooden bowl. Tyrion drank desperately, feeling refreshed as he pushed the bowl away. Then, with a puzzled tone, he commented, "I must say I'm surprised, sir. I thought you were at Prince Targaryen's side at the moment." Yes, Barristan had fled King's Landing in the first week of the rumors about Prince Targaryen. His departure caused shock and surprise, especially among the Kingsguard, who had lost their Lord Commander. "I wanted to, but I couldn't go to my future king empty-handed," Barristan replied, dipping a piece of hard bread into the water and feeding it to Tyrion with a deep, serious look. Tyrion ate the bread without hesitation, immediately understanding the old knight's intentions. "You want to use me as a trophy for Prince Enar? Perhaps to seek forgiveness for your sins and once again serve House Targaryen?" Barristan didn't deny it. He just nodded slightly and replied, "You're right about forgiveness. But if he so wishes, I will die anyway." His tone was calm, as if death were nothing more than a trivial possibility. Tyrion arched an eyebrow, trying to change his mind. "Do you realize that your chances of dying are high? You let his father perish at Robert's hands. Queen Riella will demand your head for that. So I will die without fear," Barristan replied, serene, as if he had accepted his fate long ago. "If death comes at the hands of the son of the one I should have protected, my sins and my oath will be redeemed at last." The old knight's blue eyes reflected an acceptance so profound that it shocked Tyrion. For the first time, he felt disgusted by Barristan Selmy's title daring. That man could die with honor, a quick and clean death. But he, Tyrion Lannister, would die slowly and painfully. Of that he had no doubt. Queen Riella would not hesitate to tear him apart for all the pain House Lannister had inflicted on House Targaryen. Especially because of the deaths of Queen Elia and her children, Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys. "Father, you really killed me," Tyrion thought, letting out a bitter, helpless laugh. Barristan, satisfied that he had given Tywin's son food and water, stood up and declared as calmly as ever, "We'll be leaving for Volantis soon. I want to arrive before Prince Enar's coronation." Tyrion didn't reply. He just stared at the ceiling of the cellar, lost in thought. "No," he thought. "I will try to live until the last breath is left in my lungs." He muttered to himself, regaining his confidence. Chapter 56, The Preparations Before the Coronation. Love is a strange thing, doing unthinkable things to you and giving you a strength that is simply shocking. At the same time, it's a poison against your determination and courage. But we love nonetheless. Humanity is strange. Enar Targaryen, reflecting on his 3 empresses. Volantis, first daughter. Diving into the warm water on a cold night, Einar couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. The water was comfortable and soothing, nothing compared to the pleasure of a hot bath on a frigid evening. The white ivory bathtub faced the balcony, offering a view of the sprawling city of Volantis in all its grandeur. The red towers burned with seemingly unquenchable flames, casting a fiery glow over various parts of the city. Candles flickered around the bathroom, their soft light dancing on the walls and ceiling. Einar looked up at the beautifully painted ceiling and smiled. His coronation was near. In just a few weeks he would be crowned king in Volantis, a title he intended to reaffirm in King's Landing. Einar Targaryen, first of his name, he muttered to himself. The title bore a weight that was unmatched, yet he had grown accustomed to it. In some inexplicable way, this heavy responsibility kept him grounded, focused, and sharp. Suddenly, the rustle of fabric being removed behind him caught his attention, followed by a sweet, gentle voice. Einar heard her words and smiled. "Of course, share a bath with me tonight, Auntie." The moment he spoke, a figure appeared beside him and Visenya's naked body appeared fully in front of him. In the candlelight, her beauty took Einar's breath away for a moment. He had seen many beautiful women in his life, Kinvara, Caitlin, Belgeir, but they all seemed inferior to the woman before him. She looked like an elf shyly covering her sacred garden with her long silver hair. Her small breasts were perfect and her pink nipples were hardened by the cold wind coming from the bathroom balcony. Her immaculate skin looked slightly sweaty in the candlelight, and her violet eyes showed a surprisingly adorable shyness. Visenya felt her cheeks burn like never before. Her heart seemed to explode from her chest. Einar's gaze seemed so intense and hot that it made her skin burn. His gaze traversed every inch of her exposed skin. She quickly dove into the water and sat down next to him in the ivory bathroom. "What do I owe to the pleasure of my beautiful aunt's company this evening?" Einar asked, with a gentle smile on his lips, his eyes radiating kindness. He didn't want Visenya to feel uncomfortable at that moment. Visenya looked at Einar's serene smile and felt her heart calm down, although it was still beating fast. It wasn't easy to stay calm, especially when it was the first time she had seen a naked man, and her future husband at that. "I just came to keep you company, you look tired." With her cheeks tinged with blush, Visenya replied in a soft, shy tone. Einar's gaze softened as he listened to her words. He could hardly believe that this beautiful, sweet young woman was a warmonger at war, chopping people up like vegetables, but so shy at times like this. "You are adorable." As he approached her, Einar spoke, forcing her to turn her face toward him. He looked into her violet eyes and kissed her lips gently. Visenya was surprised for a moment and wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her naked body against his. Einar's hands automatically wrapped around Visenya's waist, and they both surrendered to the kiss with a warm, enveloping intensity. They both seemed desperate to feel each other's lips colliding, sucking and biting like there was no tomorrow. They were satisfying each other's decades-old desires as they tasted the intense, hot sensation of the kiss. Surprisingly, Visenya's shyness lasted only for the beginning, as she became bolder and used her hands to explore Einar's body without scruples. While one hand clung to his hair, the other ran down his body. They parted for a moment, both leaning their foreheads against each other and catching their breath. This kiss was better than Dany's. Einar spoke between quick breaths, his lips slightly swollen from the wild kiss. Visenya smiled and seemed to gain an almost supernatural confidence. "Let me wash your body." She spoke in a soft, gentle tone. Einar nodded and allowed it. Visenya took the cloth from beside the ivory bathtub and rubbed it gently against his chest, wiping his skin with care and devotion as she watched his body with a gaze that gradually grew warmer and full of desire. "Einar, you don't have to burden yourself, I will be your queen." As she gently rubbed the silk cloth against his face, Visenya commented as she kissed his lips chastely. "I'm sorry, I've done so many things on my own over the years that I forgot that I now have two beautiful wives." Einar replied, stroking Visenya's face with his thumb, gliding slowly over her wet skin. "A Targaryen alone in the world is a terrible thing." Visenya nodded, enjoying the caresses on her face, feeling that in these small gestures he truly cared for her. It wasn't love they both felt at the moment, but companionship, love that would come later in their marriage when they got to know each other better. Perhaps only Daenerys was truly in love with Einar at this moment. "Thank you, I will remember your words, Visenya." Einar spoke, kissing her cheek gently as he pulled her into a tight embrace, their naked bodies fitting perfectly into each other's. Feeling her body and her small breasts pressed against his chest, the softness and warmth of them, Einar began to breathe a little faster. Even with the extreme self-control he had over his emotions, he felt a certain part of his body stiffen like never before. "Do you know how much I'm holding back from fucking you right here and now?" Nibbling at Visenya's ear, Einar spoke in a husky voice, full of desire. Visenya let out a soft sensual moan as she felt the nibbling on her ear. She looked up at Einar with her watery eyes and felt something hard and warm touch her belly, almost like a sword. She knew exactly what it was. She wasn't a child, she was almost 19. Women her age had been married for a long time and had children. But she wasn't ready to consummate her marriage in a bathtub. She wanted a night worthy of a queen with her king, not just a night of passion. She could have endless nights like that in the future, but the first one would always be special. Einar knew that, but that didn't mean they couldn't do something else. Hearing the whisper in her ear, Visenya's cheeks flushed like never before, as red as two juicy apples. "I will repay you, my dear queen," Einar whispered again, like a demon tempting his prey to unknowingly fall into the abyss. Visenya looked at Einar with a hesitant look. She was reluctant to continue because she didn't know if she would really make her future husband comfortable, and coupled with her inexperience, she feared to cause more pain than pleasure. But seeing Einar's encouraging and increasingly tender gaze, she gradually began to kneel before him, keeping her gaze fixed on his eyes. What followed was something Einar loved every moment of. Seeing that adorable, innocent face do something so indecent made his sense of conquest rise to simply astronomical levels. Stroking her silver hair lovingly, Einar enjoyed the feel of her mouth as he closed his eyes. He was in heaven. Seeing Visenya return from her long bath, Daenerys quickly jumped out of bed and asked with a curious look, "Tell me all the details, sister." Visenya's face instantly turned red as she remembered the events in the bathroom. How could she tell her sister and mother that she had done something so shameful and unworthy of a princess? However, she had to admit that she enjoyed every moment of it, especially when Einar knelt before her and did as he had promised. Knowing that she had the power to make the most powerful man in the world kneel and do those shameful things certainly made her sense of conquest grow like never before. "Daenerys, stop pestering your sister, she certainly doesn't want to talk about it," Riella commented, seeing the embarrassment on her daughter's face. She was a grown woman, how could she not know what could happen in a bathroom? Especially when two lustful young men were involved. However, when she saw her daughter's normal walk, she knew that her daughter still retained her purity, for which she thanked her beloved grandson. How could a queen have her first time in a mere bathtub? Daenerys rolled her eyes but didn't ask what had happened in the bathroom again, though she was curious. If it hadn't been for her mother's insistence, she would have wanted to go in Visenya's place. But as her mother had said, they both needed equal time alone with Einar. Something Daenerys agreed to. She didn't want to be like Queen Rhaenys and Queen Visenya. Aegon spent a day with Visenya and 10 days with Rhaenys. She'd heard the stories and didn't want that to happen to her and her sister. Chapter 57, The Preparations Before the Coronation 2. Is the gift of a god really a gift? I doubt it, but we must accept what fate bestows upon us. Einar Targaryen, watching the water of life. Volantis at night. Einar was in his room wearing only baggy silk pants, his purple eyes focused on the paper in his hand. The quill with its ink-soaked tip was gradually drawing the outline of something completely impossible for people on this planet to figure out what it really was. With her head resting on his lap, Daenerys, wearing a transparent pink nightgown, was on her stomach, swinging her feet up and down as she looked at the drawing with a curious gaze. In her eyes, the drawing showed what she could sum up as a dragon made of iron, but much fatter and with intimidating spikes. Leaving Einar's lap, Daenerys went to his back and hugged him from behind while wrapping her arms around his neck. She rested her chin on his shoulder and saw more clearly the scrawl being drawn on the paper in black ink. "What is it?" "It looks like a very ugly fat iron dragon," she asked, her lilac eyes filled with a curiosity that was almost impossible to contain. Einar let out a laugh hearing her question. Stopping painting, he took the girl in his arms and showed her the paper. "It's a space cruiser, imagine it as a ship that flies and spits fire," he explained as he pointed to the drawing on the paper. "Can that exist?" she asked with a perplexed expression. In her mind, only dragons could have that kind of power, but here she was seeing something that could have that same power. How could she not be confused and incredulous? "It will come into existence 500 years from now," Enar replied with a soft tone. His purple eyes seemed to glow with a phosphorescent radiance. Seeing that glow, Daenerys knew that her nephew was having a vision of the future. What a shame, I wanted to see it for myself. She muttered to herself. She really wanted to see a ship capable of flying through the air. You'll see. Enar kissed her forehead tenderly and spoke in a gentle tone. Daenerys looked confusedly at Enar. How could she live 500 years? Seeing her cute expression, Enar smiled and spoke. You, me, Visenya, and all our family will live longer than any other humans in the world. He continued, this planet is just the beginning, Daenerys. One day we will leave it and venture into the stars. We will be the gods for our people as we pave the way for the eternal prosperity of the human race. Do you want to see? Enar asked, looking at Daenerys with a calm gaze. Daenerys nodded silently as she closed her eyes. Enar reached out and gently touched Daenerys' forehead with the tip of his finger, transferring some fragments of memories he had seen in the future. Planets, other civilizations, and thousands of different races. An endless war full of death and horror. And at the end of it all, a ruby throne could be seen, and sitting on it was someone Daenerys knew very well. Her beloved nephew. Opening her eyes, Daenerys couldn't help but open her mouth and desperately suck air into her lungs. She looked at Enar with a frightened gaze, but that fear vanished the moment she saw the purple eyes looking back at her with a calm, determined gaze and with a sense of confidence that was simply unshakable. Holding Daenerys' face in his right hand, Enar used his thumb to stroke her cheek, calming her with this gesture. It's all right, we'll walk this path together. He spoke, his tone so gentle and warm that it made the fear for the future completely disappear from her mind. Together and forever together. Daenerys said, hugging Enar tightly, who just smiled and hugged her back. Yes, forever together. Enar answered in her ear with a determined tone. Visenya's words the night before had made him stop wanting to do everything alone. He had people by his side who could carry some of the burden he was carrying. Enar assumed that if he remained as he was before, he would gradually become indifferent to everything and everyone, having only one purpose in life, to take humanity to a peak never seen or thought of by any other human. But would he still be himself or just a puppet for the omnipotent and omniscient God? What's that? I don't remember having anything like that in the room before. Hearing Daenerys' question, Enar followed her voice and saw that on a wooden chest of drawers, a delicate glass vial could be seen. Inside the vial was a thick turquoise liquid. Enar's eyes narrowed at the sight of the glass vial with the suspicious liquid inside. A name appeared in his mind. Water of Life. Leaving Daenerys on the bed, Enar got off the bed and picked up the vial, looking at it intently. The prince knew exactly who, or rather what, had sent it to him. The omnipotent and omniscient God. A reward for following the path you've paved for me? Enar muttered, wanting to throw that jar against the wall and destroy it. Your face looks strange, what happened, Enar? Daenerys, who had gotten out of bed, walked across the cold floor in her bare feet and asked, coming to his side. It was the first time she had seen that expression on her nephew's face. She had always seen that Enar was always calm with a smile on his face no matter what the news, but now she saw an expression of anger, almost a feeling of pure fury in his expression. Hearing Daenerys' worried voice, Enar's turbulent mood calmed down in an instant. He looked at her and pulled her into a tight embrace. Laying his head in the crook of her neck, Enar gradually calmed down, smelling the faint scent of lavender coming from the Planetos after their bath. It's nothing, just a present from a nasty guy. Enar answered her earlier question with an amused laugh. Daenerys frowned but didn't continue asking. She knew that Enar was hiding something from her, but she didn't go on to ask what it was. She didn't want the trust they had just established to be tested by a few mere questions. If she had to know, Daenerys was sure that Enar would tell her everything. Like her, he hated lies. After all, as her mother had said, a relationship is based on mutual trust. Guessing Daenerys' thoughts, Enar couldn't help but smile. He kissed her cheek and mentally thanked her for having such an understanding wife. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk about the omnipotent and omniscient God, but what he was planning was best left to him alone for the time being. Returning to the bed with Daenerys in his arms, Enar gently placed the young woman on the bed and lay down beside her. It was Daenerys' day to spend the night with him, something that Daenerys and Visenya had arranged between them, and he was grateful. Finding the most comfortable position on his chest, Daenerys rested her head on his chest and asked with a hopeful tone, Enar, will I be able to create a ship that flies? Enar was surprised for a moment, but then smiled with satisfaction. Daenerys could very well choose to be an idle queen, but she chose to improve rather than settle for what she had at the moment, which pleased him. Although I don't know how to make a flying ship either, I can teach you what I do know. Enar naturally didn't know how to make a space cruiser. The Earth he had lived on was still normal and far from special exploration, but he had an in-depth knowledge of physics, quantum physics, and other knowledge. His time in the hospital bed was spent with nothing but books, the only way for him to entertain himself. Unfortunately, that damned disease even took his only happiness. Daenerys' eyes shone with a touch of emotion, but then she thought of something very worrying. Enar, if flying ships exist, haven't dragons become obsolete? Enar smiled at the very important question for their future. Of course not. While science evolves, magic won't be left behind. Dragons have become stronger with blood magic. We will make them true gods capable of destroying stars. Daenerys didn't doubt a word Enar said. She practically had blind and absolute trust in Enar. Just as Enar and Daenerys were getting ready for bed, someone knocked on the door. Your Grace, Archbishop Bonero has sent word that the ship carrying the representatives of House Martell has docked in the harbor. Enar heard Titus' voice behind the door and couldn't help but be surprised. It looks like we'll be going to the throne room to welcome our guests from afar. Enar spoke with an amused tone. Daenerys rolled her eyes, but she was also curious about the famous House Martell. Chapter 58, The Preparations Before the Coronation, 3. Lies and secrets rarely stay hidden for long. Fate likes to make you remember the past. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell. Enar was sitting on a throne made of cold metal, but painted red. He was wearing black clothes with the coat of arms of House Targaryen. On his head he wore a diadem of Valyrian steel with round rubies. It was a crown similar to that of Aegon I Targaryen, but obviously a replica. In the perfectly lit throne room there was not only Enar, Daenerys was present, just a few steps away from him, sitting on a chair ornamented with gold and silver, a much more comfortable throne than the one Enar was sitting on at the moment. To match Enar, Daenerys wore a blood-red dress with the coat of arms of House Targaryen in black. On her head, she wore a delicate and beautiful crown studded with beautiful rubies. Although they weren't both kings and queens at the moment because they hadn't been crowned properly, they were unmatched king and queen at the moment. In addition to the two of them, Titus, Sigmund and Willem were present, all wearing white armor and white capes. Under their command, dozens of guards wearing red armor were lined up side by side in the long corridor leading to the thrones above the white steps. Standing on the first steps, Kinvara in her beautiful red dress looked up at the throne with a calm and composed gaze, an elegant smile on her lips. Visenya and Riella were not present, something Enar had asked for. Both women were tired of helping him all day to deal with the hundreds of documents concerning the governance of Volantis. How could Enar disturb the sleep of both women because of a visit from foreigners, even if those foreigners were his allies? Your Grace, the captain of the Emperor's daughters requests an audience as a matter of urgency. Kinvara spoke, drawing the attention of Enar and Daenerys. Daenerys in particular looked at her with even more curiosity. Enar wasn't hiding anything from her, including some secret organizations like the Emperor's Daughters. An intelligence and assassination organization composed only of women trained by extremely brutal means, forging women capable of killing 5 men with one dagger. What's more, according to Enar, she would be in charge of the Emperor's Daughters. In other words, she would command this entire secret organization. In Enar's words, she only had to report to him and no one else. Honestly, this thrilled her. She had already noticed that she wasn't suited to taking part in wars given her small size. Although she gained in agility, she didn't have infinite stamina, and when her stamina ran out, death would be the only fate awaiting her. As the leader of the future organization of the Emperor's Daughters, she felt that she wouldn't be as bored and with nothing to do as many might expect her to be. Send her in. Resting the gourd in his hand, Enar replied with a touch of interest growing in her eyes. It wasn't normal to disturb him in the night, especially so late at night. With Enar's words, a secret passage appeared behind a pillar, revealing a figure dressed completely in black. There wasn't a scrap of skin exposed on her, only a pair of brown, almost black eyes could be seen. The woman walked under the marble floor under the watchful eyes of all the guards, especially Titus and Sigmund. Although both had not received extensive combat training, the brothers were not something to be underestimated, especially with their speed and abnormal strength. Both could kill dozens of men without any difficulty. The woman knelt below the steps and looked directly at her Messiah. "It is an honor to meet you in person, Son of Light." She spoke with a devout and calm tone. "Forgive me for disturbing your sacred rest, but the information I received was of extreme urgency." "Don't worry, Vivian. Don't hesitate to do your work as you've been taught. I don't care about my rest." Enar looked at the mysterious woman before him and commented with a rare tone of appreciation. He liked people like that, not relaxing in their work. He couldn't relax. How could his subordinates relax before his master? "Yes, Prophet," Vivian answered respectfully, but was shocked inside. The Daughters of the Emperor had thousands of members. She had never expected that her name would be remembered by the Son of Light. She was just one of hundreds of captains in the organization. "Our spies in Westeros at the Red Keep sent messages that the small council met dozens of times last month. Although it was impossible to hear the conversation since only members or great nobles can enter the small council chamber. Given the rumors we've spread throughout the capital about the prophet, it's likely that this was the main subject of the Little Council's constant meetings." Vivian spoke in a calm tone and continued. "The reason for the rush to report this information was that the Master of Coin called Peter, also known as Littlefinger, is desperately gathering gold for House Baratheon's coffers." Enar understood the urgency of the situation. A large collection of money might seem harmless, but it absolutely was not. What did Robert urgently need money for? Enar eliminated the most obvious reasons, and one in particular popped into his mind. "He wants to hire assassins to kill me. And the only assassins who could be that expensive are the faceless assassins of the Black and White House of Bravos." Enar muttered to himself, guessing Robert's, or rather Tywin Lannister's, intentions. Although Enar whispered, his words were particularly audible to everyone in the Great Hall. Daenerys for the first time showed an expression of anger at hearing the whisper of her sweet future husband. A flame of fury and rage bubbled up in her chest, threatening to explode at any moment. Although she knew it would happen, she was still furious at the Fat King's malicious intentions. Her hands gripped the arms of the throne tightly. She promised herself that she wouldn't let Enar get hurt in front of any dirty, cruel murderer. Titus and Sigmund looked at each other and nodded. Although they had to train, protecting Enar was the most important thing to them. He was the reason they were both alive. He gave them a glorious goal that was truly worth fighting and dying for. Enar turned them into humans again. They were no longer insignificant beggars living on the streets with no purpose who would probably survive by robbing and murdering. Bonero and Kinvara in particular were even more furious. Robert's actions were no different from the highest act of blasphemy anyone could commit. "Your Grace, let me lead the fleet of ships to attack the coast of Westeros, prevent any ships from crossing the sea," Bonero ordered, looking towards Enar, sitting on the red throne. Proposal denied. Enar refused without any hesitation, making the middle-aged man look extremely sad. "This murder is a good thing. It gave me the justification to dirty his name and glorify mine even more." Seeing everyone's expressions, including Daenerys, Enar explained patiently. "Vivian, go and spread the news of the assassination attempt orchestrated by Robert Baratheon. Tell them that as well as being a murderer of kin, their Fat King was a cowardly man who doesn't have the courage to fight on a battlefield. Tell them what their real king is like." Enar spoke each word with a calm expression. Honestly, the assassination attempt was expected by him. After all, he had a dragon and a large army. Only a fool would stand by and wait for something like this to knock on the door. Enar could very well use the assassination attempt to benefit him even more. Undermine Robert's reputation among the people and use it to spread his name. With that, at least his future rule will be smoother at first without so much mistrust on the part of the people. They will accept him more easily and quickly. Something very essential in the future for the war against the others. Daenerys looked at Enar in surprise and couldn't help feeling that she was still very inexperienced when it came to being cunning. She could never have thought that suffering an assassination attempt could bring so many benefits. With the amount of murders she had suffered growing up, she could well have become legendary in the eyes of the people of Essos. Chapter 59, The Preparations Before the Coronation 4. It seems that Rhaegar's ghost has come back to life and is bringing fire and blood to his murderers, Oberyn Martell thought when he saw Prince Enar's appearance. In the port of Volantis, a huge ship with no coat of arms was docked. "Uncle, is Volantis in the same shape as you saw it on your last visit?" Arianne asked, looking at the gigantic red towers burning brightly. The city seemed alive even at night, with people coming and going in a hurry. It's very different. In the old days this city smelled like a sweaty old whore, Oberyn replied, looking at the city he had visited 7 years ago. It really was very different from what he remembered, especially the people, whom he had always considered strange. Oberyn's comparison made Arianne and all his daughters laugh. His mistress, Ilaria, took his arm and subtly pointed forward with her eyes. Oberyn followed his lover's gaze and saw troops approaching. They were all wearing red armor and looked powerful. It wasn't a new army that had never taken part in a war. The soldiers in front of him were experienced and had seen war, steel and blood up close. A truly powerful army. According to Doran's spies, Oberyn knew that this army had fought against a horde of 40,000 Dothraki, not to mention the army of mercenaries. It was a great achievement, given that he knew the Dothraki and the mercenaries better than anyone. After all, he himself had been the general of a group of mercenaries. However, it was the man leading the soldiers who caught Oberyn's eye. He was a middle-aged man, tall and thin. His skin was black as tar, darker than coal or jet. He was a monster of a man, huge, over 6 feet tall and as wide as 2 men. A tangle of pure white hair grew around his face like a lion's mane. Moqorro, the black flame of Volantis. Oberyn recognized the man in an instant. There was no way not to. The Desert Prince saw the guards he had brought from Dorne position themselves between them, stopping the advance of the red-armored soldiers. "Welcome to Volantis, Prince Oberyn Martell and Princess Arianne Martell. I am Moqorro, a Red Bishop." Moqorro ignored the Dorne guards and spoke with a calm and compassionate tone, but his voice was deep and thunderous. "I didn't announce my arrival in advance, Priest Moqorro," Oberyn said. "I would like to know how you anticipated our arrival." This was a top-secret trip. Doran and Oberyn had planned it for months so as not to attract the attention of anyone in Westeros. Yet there they were, in front of an entourage ready to welcome them. Moqorro looked at Oberyn and smiled mysteriously. "I saw you in the flames, Prince Oberyn. I saw your ship leave Dorne and go through the storm in the dark night." Oberyn narrowed his eyes and glared at the man. He really didn't like magic. It always turned simple things into something complicated. Couldn't the man simply answer the question by saying spies? Now he would really get paranoid about a lot of things. "Really surprising to see the future through the flames," Oberyn replied in a dry, slightly deep tone. "You'll see that this is just one of the countless blessings that the Omnipotent and Omniscient Lord has bestowed upon us, his lost lambs in a sea of suffering." Moqorro spoke as he gestured for everyone to follow him. Oberyn felt his heart squeeze at those words. He really didn't like magic. "Thank you for the welcome, Moqorro. I assume we'll be well received by our prince and future king." Arianne, with the highest status in the entourage, took the initiative to speak to the Red Bishop. "The Prince of Light awaits you in the throne room." Moqorro replied with a devout and extremely respectful tone at the mention of Enar. That look wasn't one of admiration. It was pure reverence, as if he were talking about a god, not a prince or king. Arianne thought as she observed the expression of the black-skinned, white-haired man in front of her. This only confirmed that the Red Faith saw Prince Enar as a god, or his representative on Earth. Arianne then understood that the Red Faith and Prince Enar were preparing for something much bigger than the Iron Throne and Westeros. As they walked through the streets of Volantis, Arianne and Oberyn noticed men and women kneeling on a large cloth. They were praying, bowing and rising. Their religious whispers filled the air. If it had been just one group, they wouldn't have been surprised. But a crowd in front of them was doing the same, all at the same time. Noticing Oberyn and Arianne's gazes, Moqorro explained in a gentle tone, despite the serious expression on his face. "They are praying for the grace of our God to fall upon them. Many are on pilgrimage from all corners of Essos. They all want to see our prophet, the Messiah who will lead the world along a sacred path. They don't really think Prince Enar can perform miracles, do they?" Obara, Oberyn's eldest daughter, asked with an incredulous expression on hearing Bishop Moqorro's words. Moqorro looked at the incredulous woman before him and snorted coldly, expressing his dissatisfaction, but said nothing. Oberyn noticed this and gave his daughter a stern look. He couldn't believe that she had actually dared to say something against a religious figure in a city full of fanatics. Nymeria looked at her sister and couldn't help but sigh. She really had to talk to her sister about always keeping her doubts to herself. Always ask something when they are absolutely alone with no one around. Nymeria looked at her sister and couldn't help but sigh. She really needed to talk to her sister so that she would always keep her doubts to herself, asking them only when they were absolutely alone with no one around. Forgive my daughter, Bishop Makoro. She is young and has not yet seen enough of the world. Oberyn, despite his appearance suggesting that he would settle things by force, was unexpectedly diplomatic. She's forgiven, but avoid speaking ill of the prophet, or your heads may appear on spears the next morning. It won't be the red faith that does that, but the faithful. Makoro replied in a calm tone. Oberyn nodded and didn't doubt his words. He was an experienced man who had seen how murderous and cruel the faith could be. Religious intolerance was something truly frightening. Casting one last glance at his daughters as a warning to them to remain silent, Oberyn finally found himself in front of a large red temple. Before entering the great temple, Makoro warned, "Follow me and don't get lost. At this hour, the great temple is very dangerous for strangers. The guards have orders to kill if necessary." "Really cozy," Obara whispered to the sisters, causing Nymeria and Tyene to roll their eyes at the bad joke at that moment. Ilaria looked at the girls and couldn't help but sigh, but still walked with dignity beside Oberyn. Oberyn and Arianne finally found themselves in front of gigantic doors. On them they both saw drawings of a large red sun, held by a giant dressed in a cloak of the same color. However, their attention was soon captured by the sound of the doors opening. Then Oberyn and Arianne heard Makoro announce his entrance. "Messiah, before you stand Princess Arianne Martell, heir to the throne of Dorne, and her uncle, Prince Oberyn Martell, along with his noble wife and daughters." Makoro spoke aloud and entered the throne room, gesturing for everyone to follow him. Ilaria and Oberyn's 3 daughters were surprised to be announced along with Oberyn and Arianne. They had never been introduced in this way before. After all, Ilaria wasn't Oberyn's wife, and his 3 daughters were bastards. When Oberyn and Arianne entered the throne room, they saw a long line of knights lined up next to the pillars, following them to the end of the corridor. At the end, ivory steps rose up, and at the top of them 2 thrones could be seen. Oberyn raised his head and looked at the central throne. On it sat a young man of around 17, although he knew that the prince was only 12. This made the Prince of Dorne wonder what Eddard Stark had fed the boy. He had white gold hair and purple eyes. His face was really handsome, inhumanly handsome. It was as if Prince Enar were a Valyrian thoroughbred. And, just as the description said, they were inhumanly beautiful. Looking directly at Prince Enar's face, and after analyzing every detail, the last vestige of doubt about the young man's identity disappeared completely from Oberyn's mind. The boy was practically Rhaegar, with only a few differences such as the color of his eyes, his hair, and the shape of his chin. Enar was Rhaegar's son. No doubt about it. Chapter 60, The Preparations Before the Coronation v. I must say I'm going to enjoy seducing him. Arianne Martell, heiress of Sunspear, on seeing Enar Targaryen. Welcome, Princess Arianne and Prince Oberyn. The arrival of House Martell has brightened these halls. I have ordered your quarters to be properly prepared for your stay in Volantis. Looking at Oberyn's shocked face, Enar smiled gently and spoke, observing the whole of House Martell, including the famous sand snakes. If Arianne were an innocent and inexperienced maiden like all the lattice of Westeros, the moment her eyes fell on him, she would fall in love with him with absolute certainty. Arianne mentally thanked Lyanna Stark for bringing the world such a blessing for women, while cursing how cruel the gods were for making someone so perfect and beautiful. Even with all her resistance to handsome men, Arianne supposed that if she spent some time with the prince, she would be cruelly taken by him and fall deeply in love with him. His voice was melodious and soft yet regal, like music to Arianne's ears. Arianne kept a sensual smile on her lips as she listened to Prince Targaryen's words. My stay would be more enjoyable with you in my bed, taking my purity and fucking me like a whore, prince. How I would love to feel my lips wrapping around your cock. She thought, lost in reverie as she imagined Enar's heavenly voice moaning at the touch of her mouth and tongue. Arianne felt the area between her legs heat up at the thought of seducing the prince into her bed. Thank you, my prince. I hope the alliance between House Martell and House Targaryen will last forever. Arianne replied politely, hiding her lustful thoughts behind a modest, elegant smile. Forever. Enar whispered to himself, his purple eyes seeming to glow for a moment. He rested his head on his hand and looked at Princess Arianne with a calm gaze. I really hope the alliance between our houses lasts forever. I'd hate to do something I don't like doing. Oberyn and Arianne narrowed their eyes at the same time, Enar's words containing a subtle threat to Dorne. At the same time, they understood that they weren't dealing with a 12-year-old, but with a 12-year-old capable of reducing an entire city of millions into a dead city. Betrayal meant death. Oberyn smiled despite the discontent in his heart, although he knew that this was Enar's way of showing strength to him and House Martell's gentle submission, but he really didn't like the threat against Dorne. "I wonder when your grace would begin your reconquest of Westeros?" Oberyn asked, looking at Enar sitting elegantly on the throne. He really couldn't believe he was seeing a man who had been raised as a bastard all his life. Every gesture, every look, every word and aura he made emanated a regal, princely feeling. Was House Stark's upbringing really so good as to create a true king? Year 296 after the conquest. Enar didn't hesitate to answer. The only reason he was delaying the reconquest was that he wanted to see the continent in chaos before he began to carry out his plans. He would confront Robert at the right time and decapitate his cousin's head along with the others. 1 year and 5 months. Oberyn muttered to himself. Although he didn't know why the prince wanted to postpone the reconquest for a year and a half. Oberyn didn't say anything or advise him to change his strategies. He had only just met the young prince. How could he give advice on something so important without even having the king's trust in the first place? "Will Dorne be at my side in the war?" Enar asked again, his lips curving into a smile that made all the women present look up at least once. Daenerys, noticing the looks on the other women's faces, was proud of Enar. In her eyes, only a mediocre man couldn't get women's attention. The more women Enar attracted, the more it meant that he was a great man. However, she didn't like the way some of these women looked at her husband. Especially the Princess of Dorne. She could hide her lust shamelessly behind a facade of elegance and innocence, but Daenerys' eyes could see through her disguise and see her true nature. "Dorne will stand by your grace in the war, as will House Stark, I hope." Oberyn replied without any hesitation. There could be no hesitation in his actions at this moment. Anything like that could arouse the young prince's antipathy and distrust. As a prince, Oberyn knew all too well that rulers were full of suspicion and had huge egos, that the slightest disrespect could have disastrous consequences for Dorne and House Martell. 3 great houses, a dragon and an army of 40,000. I'm better than Aegon at the moment. Enar let out a laugh and joked, making the whole throne room feel more relaxed. It showed how powerful being a king was, your mood being able to influence your surroundings unconsciously. Enar wasn't surprised by this and found it very normal. It was the power of social influence being exerted on others. It was strange, but people are naturally submissive to others when they meet someone stronger. The concept of equality is so widespread in modern society that people forget that the strongest and most influential people always control their lives from their own governments. Instead of the government fearing the people, it was the people who feared their government. Suddenly, Enar felt an intense gaze fall on him. He followed the source of the gaze and saw a girl with pale blonde hair down to her shoulders. Her eyes were an icy shade of gray and her face was more androgynous than feminine. Looking at the sword at her waist, Enar narrowed his eyes. There was no way he wouldn't recognize one of the 3 legendary swords of Westeros. "Dawn, do you wish to speak, milady?" Enar asked with a growing interest in his gaze. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the not particularly tall girl stepped forward and knelt down below the steps. "I am Leda Dane, the current sword of the morning of House Dane." Leda spoke, raising her head and looking at Enar with her icy gray eyes. There was no expression on her face, just an inexpressive feeling. "Just as my uncle became a Kingsguard, I wish to follow in his footsteps." Daenerys couldn't help but look at the girl with a surprised look. She looked at the sword at the girl's waist and saw that it really was Dawn at her waist. However, in the books she had read about Westeros, there was no record of a woman from House Dane wielding the legendary sword Dawn. Enar spoke after a brief silence. "You will abandon your titles and possessions, you will not be able to exercise your function as a woman, and you will never be able to have a husband. It will be a sword to protect me, a tool and nothing more. So I ask you again, are you sure of your decision, Leda Dane?" Enar asked, rising from his throne and descending step by step, his purple eyes fixed on the cold gray eyes of the girl in front of him. Everyone held their breath for fear of missing what was about to happen. As Enar had said, being part of the Kingsguard wasn't just about joining any order of knights, it was about the knight ceasing to be an individual and becoming a sword to protect the king and nothing more. "My body, mind and soul are yours, your grace." Leda replied without any hesitation, causing Enar's lips to curve into a smile. "Give me your sword." Enar ordered, and Leda drew Dawn from its scabbard in a mere instant. The moment she drew her sword, 2 swords appeared at her neck. If the swords advanced any further, Leda's head would be cut straight off. It was Titus and Sigmund, both of whom had acted at the same moment. Leda's eyes for the first time showed some emotion other than respect for Enar. There was a warlike look in her eyes, full of the thrill of battle. She almost didn't see the swords of the teenagers in front of her being drawn. It all happened in a mere instant, and the swords were already dangerously close to her neck. Oberyn couldn't have been more shocked. He only saw 2 fleeting lights from the air, and 2 teenagers had surrounded Leda with their swords close to her neck. It shocked him to the core. Was that speed of movement really something humans could do? "Fall back, Titus and Sigmund," Enar ordered with a simple wave of his hand, something the brothers obeyed without hesitation and stepped back, but his gaze hadn't left Leda. If she tried anything, they would kill her in an instant. "They're too protective of me," Enar said with a laugh, oblivious to the slightly tense atmosphere. "I'll do exactly the same job as them, my king. I will protect you with my life and all my devotion." Leda replied with a cold but respectful look towards Enar. Enar smiled and commented in an amused tone. "You really do look like your father." Leda's hands trembled for a brief moment at the mention of her father, but she was soon calm again. Enar couldn't help but find her reaction amusing. Yes, Leda was his cousin, to be precise. She was the bastard daughter of Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell and Lady Ashera Dane of Starfall. Chapter 61, The Preparations Before the Coronation, 6. What would you do if you were the target of countless gods? I like to think I'd want to cut everyone's head off, but unfortunately that's not possible, at least at the moment. Who knows in the future? God Emperor of Planetos, Enar I Targaryen. It's a good sword. Looking at Dawn in his hand, Enar commented with a smile on his lips. His eyes were glowing with a phosphorescent light, seeing a certain timeline unfolding before him. Looking at Leda, still kneeling, Enar returned the sword and waited for the girl's oath. Leda, knowing what she had to say, began to speak while still kneeling in front of Enar. "I, Leda, sword of the morning of House Dane, stand before your grace, my king, with this sword as proof of my loyalty. I swear by my honor and my blood to protect your majesty and the kingdom until my last breath. My steel will be your steel, and my fate will be intertwined with yours." Enar smiled and replied, "I, Enar Targaryen, first of my name, king of the Undulls, the Rhoynars and the First Men, lord of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm, accept your oath, Leda of House Dane." "So, leader of House Dane, I ask you for the 3rd time. Will you give up your titles and possessions to serve me until your last breath?" "Yes," Leda answered without any hesitation. "Will you abandon your role as a woman and never be able to marry and have children?" "Yes," Leda answered without any hesitation. "Then rise, leader of House Dane, lady commander of the King's Guard." Enar ordered, and Leda stood up. All the guards in red armor began to bang their spears against the floor at the same time, creating a symphony throughout the throne room. An almost sacred atmosphere seemed to reverberate off the walls of the hall. However, Enar's next words destroyed the sacred and thrilling atmosphere. "You have your first order, Leda." Enar spoke, causing many to be shocked. Leda, with Dawn in her hands, waited in silence for her king's words. Enar climbed the steps again and sat on the throne, making himself comfortable on the cold metal seat. He finally continued, speaking in a calm tone. "A faceless assassin from House Black and White has infiltrated House Martell's entourage. Locate him and bring me his head." Enar gestured for Daenerys to come to him, and the girl obeyed, whereupon Enar placed her on his lap under the girl's shy eyes. "Watch, it will be an interesting scene," Enar whispered in her ear. Daenerys nodded and settled into a more comfortable position on his lap. Her eyes looked at the fight about to begin with a look full of anticipation. "Yes, my king," Leda replied as she walked towards the House Martell entourage with Dawn in her hands. As soon as Enar's words rang out in the throne room, all the surrounding red guards formed a circle around House Martell, surrounding everyone, including Arianne and Oberyn, who were shocked by such sudden events. Titus and Sigismund didn't move and stood in front of the throne, as did Kinvara, Benero, Makoro, and Ser Willem, all ready to defend Enar and Daenerys. Oberyn drew his sword and looked at all his guards. He was absolutely certain that his daughters, niece and mistress, were really them, but the guards he wasn't so sure about. Obara, Nymeria and Tyene moved into position around her father and Arianne, protecting the prince and princess of Dorne. Illyria was the only one who stood behind Oberyn, holding a dagger in her hands. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the guards of House Martell. "What is the greatest duty of a House Martell guard?" Oberyn asked, looking at all 10 of his guards. 9 voices sounded at once. "Never die with a sword clean of blood, avenge the dead and fight to the last breath, there is no surrender in Dorne." Oberyn's eyes focused almost immediately on the last guard, who remained silent while the others responded without hesitation. Suddenly, the fleeting light of the sword appeared in the air, and just as he was about to behead the supposed guard of House Martell, the guard struck a completely inhuman pose, dodging the sword while bending backwards in an extremely difficult pose. Leda didn't stop and pursued the assassin with a cold, deadly stare. She never imagined that her entrance ceremony to the Kingsguard would be tainted by a filthy murderer. To say she was furious at that moment was an understatement. Under everyone's eyes, an impressive and legendary fight was taking place in front of them. Dawn was slicing through the air at an astonishing speed in a sequence of deadly and precise attacks. The assassin was just running away while dodging the blows of the sword with equally astonishing agility. However, he couldn't escape Leda's sword forever. Small cuts soon accumulated on his body, which consequently made the assassin's speed slower and slower, making it even easier for Leda to inflict more damage. Titus and Sigismund watched the fight with admiration in their eyes. They may have been stronger and faster than Leda, but their technique could not be compared to Leda, who had trained all her life in the art of the sword. They were beginners, while Leda had already achieved the rank of master swordsman at a tender age. Thinking that Leda would go through the same process of improvement that they had, the girl would become a veritable killing machine. They both looked at each other and saw each other's thoughts in their eyes. They would have to train for decades to reach Leda's level, and they couldn't relax. They had a duty and responsibility to protect their king. Leda swung her sword towards the assassin's head. The attack was deadly and cold, just like her eyes at that moment, but the man drew a dagger and defended the blow. He used the dagger to change Dawn's trajectory and took advantage of the moment to kick the newly appointed Lady Commander of the Kingsguard in the stomach. The girl withstood the attack on her belly and used all her strength, changing the trajectory of the sword still in the air and making a cut from her belly to the assassin's shoulder. The assassin stared at her in disbelief, as if he was surprised by someone changing the trajectory of a sword while it was still in the air. Blood oozed from the wound in large quantities and fell onto the marble floor with sounds that were particularly audible in this silent environment. The assassin's breathing increased as he stared fearlessly at his approaching death. Leda didn't mind the assassin's wide-eyed stare and brandished her sword again without hesitation. This time the man had nowhere to escape, and surprisingly she could see in his gaze that he was facing death calmly, which happened in the next instant. Dawn cut the man's head off cleanly. The head fell off the body and rolled a few times before stopping. Curiously, his gaze was fixed on Enar sitting on the throne with Daenerys on his lap. Enar could see that the faceless assassin was looking at him with a calm and cold gaze. There was something else in the man's gaze, as if he were a completely different person, or rather, a completely different being. Annoying gods. Enar muttered to himself, but Daenerys heard his mutter perfectly, but didn't ask him at that moment surrounded by people. However, what happened in the next moment made everyone feel chills running through their bodies. The bodiless head smiled and bared its strangely pale teeth, blinking its eyes that were now as black as the purest darkness in the world. Black flames burned silently in the empty cavities of his eyes. "Your soul is beautiful, champion of light. I want it." A cold, frightening voice sounded, causing everyone's expression to change dramatically. Even Kinvara and Oberyn couldn't help but become completely solemn. However, the frightening, cold atmosphere was broken by a loud laugh containing a strong irony. Enar, who had come down from his throne, walked while he had Dawn in his hand, given to him by Leda. He laughed and let out a few loud laughs. Using blood magic, he made his blood combust and the legendary sword began to catch fire. Crimson flames covered the entire blade, the intense heat making the air around it extremely volatile. "I'm really scared. Look, I'm shaking with fear." Enar responded to the talking head's words with a feigned expression of fear. There was an amused smile on his face as he saw the expression of the god who dared to possess a mortal before him. "I'll be waiting, god of many faces." Enar didn't wait for the words of the god who had just possessed the killer's body. He swung his sword. The sword pierced the head and crimson fire began to consume the head. The god of many faces just let out a terrifying laugh as his temporary avatar was reduced to ashes in mere seconds. Everyone watched in silence as Enar spoke to the talking head without fear and even provoked it with boldness and courage, which marked many of the people present. It was as if Enar's presence calmed everyone down. Even if the sky collapsed, he would be there to hold it up. It was a strange feeling, but it appeared in the heart of every person present. "What an interesting evening," Enar commented, trying to ease the tension in the air, but apparently not succeeding. Enar didn't blame them for being so tense. Seeing a talking head really made you rethink life and many philosophical questions. Chapter 62, Enar Targaryen, first of his name I. Someone told me that manipulation was a subtle art, but I think otherwise. Manipulation is a simple art, and with a little knowledge you can make other people fall for your manipulations without too much difficulty. Humans love to hear what they want to hear. Enar Targaryen watched the crowd below him, who were waiting for his words. "Princess Arianne and Prince Oberyn, due to previous events, we will all rest and break our fast in the morning." Enar handed Dawn back to Leda, who followed him loyally. He turned to the House Martell entourage and spoke in a casual, relaxed tone, as if he hadn't just burned a head suspected of being a death god. Arianne and Oberyn didn't know what to say and just nodded, remembering the scenes that had taken place a few moments ago. Even with all his experience, Oberyn didn't know what to say at that moment. Which wasn't his fault. According to Enar's words, the head belonged to the god of many faces, the god of death worshipped in many places in Essos, and especially by the House of Black and White in Bravos. After exchanging a few more words with Enar, Oberyn took all his family and left for the rooms prepared for his stay in Volantis. At that moment, all he wanted was a good drink and perhaps a night of sex to relax. Seeing his guests disappear, the smile on Enar's face also faded, making Bonero, Makoro and Kinvara feel as if they were stepping on hot coals. One day, I want all the information about the House of Black and White and all the places that worship this damned god of death. I'm going to exterminate that religion from the world and make it forgotten by everyone." Enar spoke each word with a cold, unquestioning tone. His purple eyes did not hide the murderous intent in his gaze. "Yes, Your Grace." The three of them answered at the same time. After that, Enar's cold gaze disappeared, and he smiled warmly at Daenerys, who had just arrived at his side. "Dany, let's go to sleep. I just want to feel my comfortable bed right now." Daenerys was speechless at how quickly her adorable nephew's expression changed. One moment, he had an expression capable of frightening the bravest of men, and the next he was smiling warmly with a gentle gaze. Suddenly, feeling her body being lifted, Daenerys let out a small cry of surprise and looked at Enar with an angry expression. "If you look at me like that, it only makes me want to intimidate you even more." Kissing her cheek, Enar commented with an amused laugh as he walked towards his room. Behind him, Titus, Sigismund, Ser William and Leda followed him with their hands on the hilt of their swords, ready to draw them at any moment. Resting her head on his shoulder, Daenerys asked in a soft and genuinely confused tone, "Enar, what's going on? Why did you call that talking head the god of many faces?" Stroking her hair, Enar smiled and replied in a soft tone, without hiding or lowering his voice, "In this world, gods exist. Many are evil and want the end of the human race." Enar continued speaking while Titus, Sigismund, Ser Willem and Leda listened to every word with extreme attention. Every 5,000 years, an eclipse will cover the world for decades or even hundreds of years. This was called the Long Night by the civilizations that survived the last long night. During this period, because of these gods, the land can no longer be used for cultivation and nature will become hostile to the human race. Man-eating monsters will rise from the shadows and bring even more chaos and death. When Kinvara calls me the Son of Light, it's because I really have been chosen by the Red God or, as I like to call him, the Omnipotent and Omniscient God. I was chosen to save humanity in the dark times to come. But because of this, many gods who wish the destruction of the human race are hostile to me. The god of many faces, for example, sensed the death of one of his believers and used his body as an avatar to reach the material world. "Are you in danger?" The first thing Daenerys asked was not about the survival of the human race, but about Enar's safety. Hearing those words, Enar felt an unfamiliar feeling bubble up in his chest with an intensity he had never experienced before. He really felt that he was falling in love with this girl who loved him with all her might, caring more about him than about herself. How could he not fall in love with someone like that? Showing a surprisingly warm smile, Enar replied in a gentle tone, "Don't worry, my queen. If the gods were allowed to walk the earth, this planet would have been destroyed by now, as would all life on it. They need a powerful vessel to support their coming, and even if they manage to enter the mortal world, they can't exercise their full power and could be killed." Daenerys breathed a sigh of relief when she heard those words. The thought of her beloved being threatened by gods was too much pressure for her young heart. Behind Enar and Daenerys, the four of them also breathed a sigh of relief. Fighting men was one thing, they could take on entire armies without fear of death, but fighting gods was something else entirely. How could mere mortals harm gods? "My king, I will protect you, even if the gods try to hurt you." Leda spoke, making Enar smile and reply, "I'll be counting on all of you to protect my little life." Even if he didn't need protection, Enar knew he couldn't kill the loyalty and determination of his subordinates. What kind of king would he be if he made such a suicidal move? How would he protect his kingdom without these people? How would he maintain order at a time when human life was worth no more than a few grains of food? How could he preserve hope without people's determination to move on? In short, he needed extremely powerful and determined legions for what was to come. Man-eating monsters were the last of his worries. Gods were much more dangerous than a million monsters, especially the god of many faces, who was cunning and intelligent. Enar's words seemed to inject huge amounts of adrenaline into the four people's bodies. At that moment, none of them had ever felt so proud to fight and die for Enar, the man who would save humanity from monsters and evil gods. Seeing the fanaticism growing in each of their eyes, Enar let out a mental sigh and continued walking. Although he knew it would happen when he said those words, he underestimated how far the faith of a determined man or woman could go. He knew that if he asked, all four of them would give their lives for him without hesitation. "Willem, I will perform your enhancement ceremony and then Leda's. Both of you must be prepared to endure the worst. You must both be prepared to endure the worst pain you have ever felt." Enar left these words before entering the room carrying Daenerys in his arms. Willem knew exactly what the king was talking about. He had personally seen his brothers transform from skinny boys into tall, strong young men in less than a day. It excited him. Nothing was more glorious for a Kingsguard than to protect a king worthy of such protection. Enar was exactly that kind of king. Any Kingsguard would give his life for a king like him, without any hesitation. Suppressing the emotions rising in his chest, Willem noticed the confusion on Leda's face and replied in a respectful tone. "Lady Commander, the enhancement ceremony is something the king uses to strengthen our bodies to an inhuman level in the eyes of all." Leda's eyes lit up when she heard Willem's words. She remembered the speed of Titus and Sigismund and finally understood why they were both so fast. Knowing that she could become even stronger to protect her king more effectively, Leda couldn't contain the smile on her lips. However, her smile wasn't pretty, it was cold and without warmth, just like her gaze. Willem couldn't help but twitch his lips strangely at the sight of that terrifying smile. The new Lady Commander of the Kingsguard was scary when she smiled. Inside the room, Enar took off her clothes and put on a pair of baggy white silk pants. He picked up the vial containing the water of life and gazed deeply into the turquoise liquid. Although he had said that the gods wouldn't attack him any time soon, Enar didn't want to let his fate be decided by others. To avoid that, he needed power. Enough power to make the gods wary while he gained time to grow. "Is drinking that stuff dangerous?" Daenerys, wearing a transparent lace camisole, asked as she lay down next to Enar. "It's not dangerous in itself, but it will awaken extremely strong powers in me, albeit at the cost of pain that is simply impossible to describe." Enar replied with a smile. Knowing she couldn't change Enar's mind, Daenerys lay down on his chest and spoke with a slightly worried tone. "I will be with you." "Thank you, my queen." Enar smiled and gently kissed her forehead. Chapter 63, Enar Targaryen, first of his name too. "The first time I saw the Immaterium I knew. It would be the source of humanity's prosperity, but also its possible ruin if not handled with care. Enar I Targaryen, God Emperor of Planetos." Enar looked at the vial in his hand and didn't hesitate. There was no indecision or fear, only a slight feeling of dread, fear of a future that he could never escape the clutches of fate. When the turquoise liquid went down his throat, a deep bitter taste attacked his palate. At first, Enar didn't feel anything wrong, but just a few seconds later, his heart started beating faster, to the point where he thought his heart would explode. Suddenly, it was as if a hammer hit Enar's head. His vision blurred, the world seemed to spin and double in front of him. Enar threw his head back as his spine arched upwards. The veins in his body bulged as a simply agonizing pain shot through him along with the blood flow coursing through his body. Daenerys watched in shock as Enar seemed to enter a trance-like state between lucid and unconscious periods. She didn't know and would never know what Enar was going through at that moment. His prescience ability was being amplified to a whole new level. If before his powers were a small puddle of water a few meters across at this moment, that small puddle of water was increasing at a great speed. Enar could now see things that had previously been hidden, dimensions overlapping the material world and dimensions far from the material world. One in particular looked like an extremely bright star against a dark background, shining much brighter than the others, making it impossible not to be noticed. It was a dimension of pure energy and energy that made up everything, the source of all magic and sorcery, although no one on Planetos knew this fact. Which was curious because they manipulated this energy but never came into direct contact with it. That in itself had saved countless lives from madness and insanity. Enar felt his mind connecting to this same dimension, his mind overloaded with infinite amounts of chaotic energy full of unpredictability. Under Daenerys' shocked eyes, blue and white rays emanated from Enar's body. The air crackled as electric arcs filled a meter around him. To Daenerys' relief, the lightning didn't take long to disappear. However, it wasn't that the lightning disappeared, but that Enar controlled the power input and cut the connection, which could be re-established at any time. But he didn't know anything about that dimension, and he definitely wasn't going to risk his life for a momentary temptation, although having access to an infinite amount of that chaotic energy was really quite tempting. "Are you sure you're going to do this?" Visenya asked, still incredulous at what she had just heard. She looked at her sister as if she were looking at someone with a mental illness. "I'm not going to die." Daenerys rolled her eyes angrily. "Don't give me that look, I'm completely sane. Who in their right mind wants to throw themselves on a funeral pyre with dragon eggs and criminals condemned to death?" Visenya muttered with an expression still skeptical of Daenerys' idea. "What do you say, Enar?" Riella glanced at the two arguing daughters and looked across the table, where Enar was eating with a calm expression. Daenerys stopped arguing with Visenya and looked at Enar with a worried look, only she knew what had happened last night in her nephew's room. She had seen with her own eyes Enar die and revive as his body contorted in sheer agony from a pain that was simply impossible to describe. Since waking up, her sweet nephew seemed to have changed subtly, even his warm smiles seemed to have disappeared for a while before returning to normal. In the process, Daenerys forgot how many times she had wiped his sweaty body with a cloth, for hours and hours while listening to his screams and his seemingly mad, insane mutterings. She cried a few times thinking of the agony Enar was going through, but wiped the tears away because she had no right to cry when Enar was enduring all that pain to protect his family. Compared to dying and reviving, she thought that entering a funeral pyre was no big deal. Her nephew took that turquoise poison without hesitation. How could she be afraid of feeling mere flames? She was a dragon and dragons weren't afraid of fire. Her indecision disappeared after seeing Enar's determination and only grew stronger. She would help Enar carry his burden no matter what. Enar, whose mind was clearer than ever, lifted his gaze and looked at his grandmother with a warm and gentle look. In front of him, a tunnel made of swirling mist unfolded before him, this tunnel branching off in different directions and heights. Billions of images of the future appeared in these tunnels. Different realities, different worlds, whole dimensions. Past, present and future. Blinking once, this tunnel and its ramifications on smaller scales disappeared and Enar responded with an absolutely confident tone. "Just trust Daenerys, grandmother. You'll be surprised." Riella let out a sigh. She stroked her own forehead. Sometimes she wondered why her family was so strange and sometimes crazy. Daenerys looked at Visenya with a victorious expression, as if to say that Enar trusted her more than her own sister. Visenya rolled her eyes and focused on Enar, remembering Daenerys' words about what happened in the throne room. "Is it true that a god possessed a human head and spoke to you, nephew?" Her voice showed no fear, perhaps because she had neither witnessed nor felt the presence of the god of many faces. Enar cut up the sausage on his plate and brought it to his mouth with the help of a fork. He looked at Visenya and replied in a casual tone. Just a clown trying to make a name for himself. The god of many faces was just that in his eyes, a god who was nothing more than a slave to the Valyrian dragon gods. After taking the water of life, Enar wasn't too worried about any gods. His power had simply grown to a whole new level. If any god dared to descend into the material world using the body of a mortal as a receptacle, Planetos would be his tomb. The night before, he had seen the creation of blood magic, and until its most recent development, all of Valyria's most powerful magical heritage was stored in his brain, just waiting for the right moment for him to learn it all. At the same time, his mind could do many things besides store memories. His mind had connected to a totally different dimension. He didn't know how to describe that dimension at the moment, but he felt that using its energy he could perform real miracles. Riella and Visenya were speechless at the casualness with which Enar spoke against a literal god. Although they hadn't seen the supposed god because they were asleep, they had heard Daenerys and Kinvara's description of the incident. It was a scene worthy of giving anyone nightmares. Daenerys only appeared proud and showed no surprise at Enar's words. In her eyes, her nephew seemed more like a god than the very gods that Essos worshipped. My king, Princess Arianne and Prince Oberyn with his wife and daughters are waiting outside. Leader approached Enar and spoke in an indifferent, calm tone. Invite them in, we'll entertain our guests from afar. Enar smiled and replied as she brought her glass to her lips, taking a sip of juice. She looks like her uncle, especially the serious look on his face. Riella looked at Leda's face and commented with a nostalgic tone, remembering Arthur and Rhaegar training together every moment. I'd say she has more of her father than anyone in House Dane. Enar commented, glancing at his cousin who was standing in the doorway. Who's her father? Riella asked curiously. Eddard Stark. Enar replied with a smile. His uncle was indeed a fertile man, 7 children and all healthy, which was surprising. Riella's eyes widened when she heard who her father was. She remembered the girl Dane and couldn't help but sigh. She was always by Elia's side, the two women were inseparable. The mention of Elia made Riella's face darken slightly. A silent fury grew in her gaze, ready to tear apart those guilty of killing her son, her good daughter and her grandson. Don't worry, grandmother. We'll have our revenge in due course, just be patient and you'll see everyone kneeling at the feet of House Targaryen once again. Noticing the look on Riella's face, Enar spoke in a calm tone, but there was an anger in it similar to Riella's own. Don't worry, grandmother. We'll have our revenge in due course, just be patient and you'll see everyone kneeling at the feet of House Targaryen once again. Noticing the look on Riella's face, Enar spoke in a calm tone, but there was an anger in it similar to Riella's own. Chapter 64, Enar Targaryen, first of his name, 3. Fate doesn't seem kind to me or my family, so I'll tear this universe apart to the last atom if necessary to protect my family, and believe me, I'll enjoy the process. Enar I Targaryen, sitting on the ruby throne of the known universe. I hope you've all rested well. I'll be considered a terrible host if that's happened. Enar spoke to the entire House Martell, all of whom were present, including Oberyn's bastard daughters. It's been a wonderful evening, Your Grace. Oberyn replied with a strained smile on his lips. He really was trying hard to stay coherent. The amount of wine he'd drunk the night before had made his head hurt so much the next day that he'd rather be pierced by a spear. I'm glad the events of the night before didn't affect everyone's sleep. Enar looked at Oberyn, who was dryly speaking with a smile. He was tempted to speak a little louder than usual or make some loud shuffle to add a little pain for the Desert Prince, but he found it too childish even for his standards. What could Oberyn answer? He simply sipped the juice on the table and let out a dry laugh. The thought of having seen a god still sent shivers down his spine, remembering that cold, malicious presence. My coronation will take place in a week's time. I would like Princess Arianne and Prince Oberyn to attend in the seats prepared exclusively for distinguished guests. I must add that you won't regret watching, there will be things to surprise anyone. Enar commented with a smile as he ate a piece of bread in one bite. It will be an honor, my prince. We'll be looking forward to what's to come. Arianne replied. She flashed her most beautiful and seductive smile. The Princess of Dorne looked at Enar wearing only a red and black tunic with a glittering gaze. Enar wearing royal clothes emanated a powerful and regal feeling, preventing anyone from despising the young man. In his current clothes he emanated a more casual and lazy feeling, but that didn't hide his powerful aura, it just made him more approachable to talk to. Daenerys looked at the Princess of Dorne and narrowed her eyes. She could see the subtle flirtation in the woman's words and actions. Looking down at Ariane's body, she muttered low. What's so great about so much chest fat? Visenya and I are prettier than her. Speaking of Visenya, Daenerys glanced at her sister to see if she had noticed what was going on, but seeing her eating with a happy look on her face, the dragon princess felt a headache coming on. Her sister was rather careless when it came to keeping Enar away from other women. Prince Enar, is it true that you have a dragon? Obara, Oberyn's eldest daughter, asked, taking everyone by surprise with her sudden question. Enar looked at the sand snakes and said, You must be the famous sand snakes. All your daughters are very beautiful, Prince Oberyn and Lady Sand. His words made everyone look at him with different eyes, whether Oberyn or Ilaria. They expected words of contempt for his daughters' status as bastards. But what happened was the opposite. There were no words of contempt or hostile looks in the prince's words and actions. Enar certainly wouldn't despise someone just because an arrogant church said that bastards were the fruit of sin. He was no fool to be influenced by such a backward religion. That's new, it's the first time Obara has been praised as beautiful. Nymeria Sand, noticing the somewhat silent atmosphere, spoke up at that moment with a funny laugh. Humph. Obara looked coldly and angrily at her sister, although the blush on her cheeks indicated an obvious shyness. Looking at his eldest daughter acting shy like a virgin maiden, Oberyn turned his gaze to Enar and pursed his lips with a touch of helplessness reflecting on his face. Although he had known it for a long time, beautiful people always have privilege. Yes, Lady Obara, I have a dragon. Enar answered Oberyn's daughter's earlier question. He likes to sleep in the training ground next door in the Great Temple, but if you go to see him I advise you not to go near him, he's been quite upset recently. Apparently he really enjoyed burning people alive and devouring their bodies. Enar's words sounded like a joke, but none of the people from House Martell laughed. They looked at Obara with resentment. Why ask something like that at breakfast? His name is Caraxes, his scales are red just like his flames. Enar continued. He's a rebellious boy who always likes to fly with me. Visenya and Daenerys rolled their eyes at Enar's words. The dragon had exactly the same temperament as his rider. Enar was just blaming Caraxes for their imperative temperament. Breakfast continued under Enar's influence, making a few jokes and leaving the atmosphere reflective. Under his care, everyone at the table seemed more comfortable and easier to get along with. As he chewed on a piece of sausage, Enar thought, real-time future vision has many uses, not just for fighting or warding off any attacks. I can manipulate the conversation according to what I see in the future. Enar was still studying the changes that had taken place in him after he drank the water of life, but so far he felt that he was gradually ceasing to be a normal human, or to be more precise, a superior human. Inside the large empty hall, 7 people could be seen. Riella, Enar, Visenya, Daenerys, Kinvara, Leda, and Missandei. Do you really want to do this, Dany? Looking at the funeral pyre before her, Riella asked, glancing at her youngest daughter once again. Although she had confidence in Enar and Daenerys, the idea of entering the flames was still insane in her eyes. It wasn't just her who was thinking this, Visenya was just as worried. Daenerys didn't answer her mother and looked at the 3 men who would be burned alive because of her. There was no feeling of mercy for these murderers and rapists. Her lilac eyes soon focused on the 3 dragon eggs inside a chest. The first of the eggs was black with reddish scales. The second of the eggs was yellowish-golden. The third was a bronze shade. They were the eggs that Enar had asked Kinvara to buy from the Magister of Pentos. Lady Kinvara, begin. Daenerys spoke, looking at Kinvara. The Reverend Mother nodded, and with a wave of her hand, the flames burning in the torches flew towards the funeral pyre, where the 3 men began to struggle violently as they tried to scream, but failed because their mouths were gagged. Kinvara looked at Daenerys going towards the fire without fear and had no doubt that if Enar didn't exist, it would be this girl who would lead humanity to survive the long night. Holding the dragon eggs in her arms, Daenerys was only a few centimeters from the fire, but she felt no heat or terror from the flames. For some reason she liked the screams of agony of the men being burned alive. It sounded like a symphony, sacred. Turning around, Daenerys saw the different expressions on everyone's faces. Her mother, her sister and Missandei all had the same expression, concern. Enar, Kinvara and Leda were totally different, all 3 looking at Daenerys with confident gazes. In Leda's case, she only trusted her king's judgment and nothing more. If he had said that Princess Daenerys would make it, then so it would be. Enar's confidence seemed to inject even more confidence into Daenerys, who smiled brightly at him, and without any hesitation, she stepped forward into the flames without fear. Riella felt her heart squeeze watching that scene. How could a mother not worry about her offspring? "Will she be all right, Enar?" Riella asked with an extremely worried tone, wishing that her daughter would go out on the funeral pyre at any moment. Her only relief was that there were no screams apart from the men being burnt alive. "She will come out of the fire with the dragons of House Targaryen completely untouched by the fire." Enar replied with a smile, looking at the flames burning fiercely. He knew that blood magic had begun to work. It wouldn't take more than a few hours for House Targaryen to gain 3 dragon riders. Chapter 65, Enar Targaryen, first of his name 4. In the end, only blood and fire really matter. Nothing more and nothing less, that's how we started and that's how we'll end. Visenya I Targaryen, the warrior queen. The screams of agony of the men burned alive disappeared 5 minutes after the flames consumed the funeral pyre. As everyone waited in silence, the fire began to change. The orange flames turned into fire dragons and flew around. Enar couldn't help but notice the same chaotic energy from the pure energy dimension present at that moment. Then he understood how the inhabitants of that world used that energy. That's what blood magic was, a sacrifice. For that very reason, the people of that planet didn't go mad using the energy of that dimension. They made sacrifices and stayed away from corruption and madness. They paid a price and received something in return, just like all the magic on the planet. Knowing this, Enar couldn't help but think of the event known as the Doom of Valyria. He theorized that something very wrong had occurred at the time of the sacrifice, causing a rift in time and space, linking the two worlds and culminating in the event that became known as the Doom. Previously, he had tried to witness the Doom in person through his prescience, but it hadn't worked. It was as if that part of time was confused and often erased from history. Suddenly, small roars sounded loudly, and the fire grew abnormally, covering half the hall in an instant. The place seemed about to be consumed by flames, including everyone in the great temple of Volantis. But at that moment, Enar stretched out her hand and under everyone's surprised gazes, the flames receded and gradually extinguished, revealing a figure still standing. Her naked body was covered in soot. She still had hair, but what really caught the eye were the 3 small winged reptiles that covered her nakedness. A black and red dragon emerged from one of her breasts and perched on her shoulder, roaring proudly to all who watched. Although it tried to look majestic, its roar was more adorable than threatening, as if the little dragon believed it was impressing everyone. Riella was breathless to see her daughter intact after that furious fire. Relief washed over her as she quickly picked up her ready-made dress and walked towards Daenerys with hurried steps. "Mom, I made it." Without bothering to show off her nakedness to those present, Daenerys spoke with a big smile on her face. She proudly displayed the 3 dragons, her voice filled with happiness and relief. The weight she had been carrying on her shoulders for a year and a half disappeared as if it had never existed. "Yes, you did it." Riella sighed deeply, relieved that her daughter was okay. She looked at the 3 little dragons and smiled gently at them. They would be the weapons that would make House Targaryen rise from the ashes and be reborn again. Visenya approached, her eyes fixed on the little golden-yellow dragon, who stared back at her with an intense gaze. She felt a strange connection forming between her and the little dragon. Then, in an instant, it was as if she had been struck by thunder from the sky. The sensation went through her whole body and she felt it. She felt that her mind was connected to another. She could perceive exactly what the little dragon was feeling at that moment. It wasn't fear or any other ordinary feeling, but an almost supernatural affection that the little creature had for her. Under the surprised gazes of Daenerys and Riella, the golden-yellow dragon left its mother's arms and flew towards Visenya, who held it as if she had received something extremely precious. "Syrax." Visenya whispered the female's name in an instant. She had already thought of names, both male and female, long before the little dragon was born. Daenerys wasn't unhappy about her draconic daughter choosing someone else. On the contrary, she felt genuinely happy. Perhaps because she was the mother of the 3 dragons, she had a special connection with them. That's why she could feel only happiness coming from the newly appointed Syrax. "Congratulations, sister." As she dressed with her mother's help, Daenerys spoke, watching Visenya holding the little golden-yellow dragon. Visenya smiled and stroked the little creature's scales. At her touch, she felt a subtle warmth, as if she were running her hand quickly over the flame of a candle. "Thank you, Dany." She spoke in a genuinely grateful tone for the effort Daenerys had made. Enar looked at the small black and red dragon on Daenerys' shoulder and couldn't help but let out a laugh. "You'll have work to do when he enters his teenage years." Daenerys looked at the adorable puppy on her shoulder and couldn't believe that something so cute could be so much work. If Enar had known what she was thinking, she would have rolled her eyes. In adolescence, dragons hardly obeyed any orders. Although this phase only lasted a few months, it was the most complicated without a whip. The dragon became completely uncontrollable. "Congratulations, princess. Your stories will be known by the people and will reach every corner of the world." Kinvara approached and spoke in a reverent tone, looking at Daenerys with much more respect than before. The princess's courage in bathing in the fire without hesitation had truly won her admiration. Suddenly, Enar looked up and smiled. "Looks like she arrived at just the right moment," he muttered to himself. "Who's here?" Riella looked away from the little bronze dragon and at Enar curiously. "Rhaenys is coming to Volantis riding her dragon." Enar replied with a smile, his eyes seeming to cross infinite distances as he stared directly at the magnificent silver dragon rapidly approaching the city. Riella widened her eyes, then smiled with a very happy expression. How long had it been since she had seen her lovely granddaughter? Outside the great temple of Volantis, Caraxes, who had been sleeping on the training field, opened his eyes and lifted his huge body off the ground. He raised his head and let out a loud, powerful roar that was heard throughout the city of Volantis. Surprisingly, a smaller, less powerful roar sounded in response. Caraxes took a few steps forward and soared into the sky in a mere instant. Oberyn, Arianne, Illyria, and all of Oberyn's daughters looked up at the gigantic crimson dragon soaring through the sky with shocked expressions. There absolutely wasn't a person on the planet who couldn't be impressed by a being of that size. Is that really something humans can control? Arianne muttered to herself. She began to admire her ancestors even more at that moment. Facing Aegon the Conqueror and Balerion the Black Dread definitely must have been something capable of frightening even the bravest princes and princesses of Dorne. "At least we don't have to worry about Sunspear burning down like Harrenhal." Nymeria joked with an amused smile on her lips. Tyene and Obara rolled their eyes at such a dull joke at that moment. Oberyn couldn't help but complain about his daughter's terrible sense of humor. Not far from Volantis, a silver shadow tore across the sky with surprising speed. If you looked closely, the silver shadow was a dragon, but it wasn't very big and could be considered small compared to Caraxes. Note: Moonfire is the size of Eryx from House of the Dragon. Sitting on Moonfire's neck, Rhaenys, who had traveled for days with Moonfire, was enjoying the feeling of flying since meeting her dragon in the north. She didn't greet anyone from House Stark and went straight to the place her brother had told her about. There, she met her dragon for the first time in the flesh. In the end, even though she knew her brother didn't want her to fly straight to Essos, she had done so and was fast on her way to Volantis. Moonfire was an extremely fast and agile dragon, her small size enabling her to perform maneuvers in the air that were simply impossible for Caraxes. Suddenly, when Rhaenys saw Volantis with its great towers, she noticed something gigantic above her. Raising her head, the princess swallowed. Although she knew of Carax's existence, she had never seen him, and Enar had said that Caraxes was only slightly large. If the monster above her was only slightly too big for Enar, she knew that Moonfire would be considered a flea in Enar's eyes. The gigantic crimson dragon flew past, causing strong, violent winds, almost knocking her over for a moment. If it hadn't been for Moonfire moving away from the dragon, she would probably have experienced something quite desperate. The people of Volantis were surprised to discover that the gigantic crimson dragon was not alone in the sky. There was a smaller but equally impressive shadow, the silver scales with purple stripes glistening in the sunlight, causing many to exclaim aloud. Rhaenys didn't know where her brother and family were, but she had a way of finding out. She just followed Caraxes, and seeing him land on a training ground, she followed in his footsteps. Jumping off the dragon, Rhaenys couldn't help thinking that it was great to be on dry land, even if flying was simply liberating. Suddenly, Rhaenys' lilac eyes focused on the group of people approaching. Rhaenys felt her body tremble, but spoke with a smile. "Grandmother,